everybody, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 19 of A Conversation with Cometan. This is the final episode of this season, guys, and it's kind of sad, but also kind of exciting too, because it means that we get to explore this, of course, the second total immersion into Astronism. For those who've been following this A Conversation with Cometan series for a while, you will remember that in season 2, quite a few of the episodes were taken up by my total immersion into Astronism lecture, which went on for hours and hours and hours. It was a huge lecture with something like, I think maybe even like 1,000 slides or something crazy like that, where I kind of explore absolutely everything to do with Astronism. This one, don't worry, the total immersion is not total immersion 2 is not 1,000 slides long. It is about 120 slides long, and I really want to present it to you today to kind of finish off this season 4 of the show, because this season has gone really well, and it has been, a pleasure to create as usual. And I wanted to do something kind of reminiscent of a couple of seasons ago, but also to bring you kind of some new additions to the Astronist world, the Astronist belief system, because there have been sort of new ideas and new practices contributed to Astronism since I did the first Total Immersion lecture series. So today I wanted to bring you the Total Immersion 2. Really excited to do that. And like I said, some of this content is brand new. It's never been published before. It is going to be officially published as part of my second treatise, which is called the Astrodoxy, which I'm still working on right now and will be for probably quite a bit longer. But I'm just so excited to kind of bring these new additions to Astronism to the world that I thought it would be good to give you guys a little bit of a preview, shall we say, of some of these new ideas that I've had, and some of these also just sometimes a new perspective on Astronism that I've gotten in the last couple of years particularly. So without delaying things any longer, let's jump into the second total immersion into Astronism. And I really actually like this sort of front page to start off with. It's really cool. What I should probably say is that at this stage is that this second total immersion is split into 12 sections. So of course, we're going to start with section 1, which is called the First Principles of Astronism. So for those who have been watching the Astronism Versus series videos, so where I look at like Astronism and Christianity, for example, or Astronism and Islam, you will have realized that the sort of fundamental or first assertion or observation that Astronism makes about reality, about the world, is that all things are limited. And this observation constitutes the first of the 4 cosmic principles. These are the first principles of Astronism, the 4 fundamental observations of the Astronist belief system, shall we say. And like I've put there, the first principle is that all things, both physical and metaphysical. And that second part is really crucial, because oftentimes when we think of the metaphysical, we associate that with, being infinite or being unlimited, shall we say. In Astronism, it's totally different. We do see even the soul and the metaphysical aspects of reality as limited as well, because they still exist to us in the cosmos, and anything that exists within a cosmos must be limited. So the soul must therefore be limited. So that's a huge divergence already in the Astronist thinking from other religions that have come before Astronism. Okay, so anyway, get back to the first principle. So all things, both physical and metaphysical, animate and inanimate, are limited by their existence in a cosmos. So it's the fact that they exist in a cosmos, in a limited reality, which includes obviously the Earth, outer space even, and all the way up to the edge of the cosmos, the edge of what is sometimes called the universe. That is all limited. Everything we see, everything we can know, everything we obviously could imagine is limited. Okay, and that is the fundamental first principle of Astronism. Once you get that idea firmly sort of stuck in your head and you apply that to every single idea in Astronism, then you're on the right path to be able to understand the Astronist worldview. Because this first principle, which is sometimes called the cosmic limitation principle, this affects every single aspect of Astronism, and you will see that coming through even in this lecture, but even also a lot of my writing as well. You will see this first principle coming through. So the second of the four cosmic principles of Astronism is that this sort of all-pervading limitation, because it's everywhere all around us, is intrinsic to cosmic existence, and it is the root cause of all suffering and evil. Okay, so that last bit is probably the most important part of that second principle. So the fact that everything is limited, but that limitation is identified as the cause of all suffering and evil. Okay, so that brings about really not just the cosmic limitation principle, which is the first principle, but the cosmic limitation problem. Okay, Astronists identify that limitation is the cause of all suffering and evil, and so therefore limitation is in a way the enemy of Astronism. It is the big problem that Astronism wants to try to solve. And of course, we do that through transcension, but that comes off in a little bit later in principle 4. So we've got that. We've got the first two principles there. The third principle, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Ooh, excuse me. The third principle of Astronism states that human beings, by consequence of our status as a sapient species, possess the potential to escape this limitation, to escape this existence. Okay, so of course what it's saying there is, well, in the first principle, we're describing reality. We're making an observation about reality, that reality is limited. The second principle is sort of making the assertion that limitation is the cause of all suffering and evil. So it identifies limitation as the ultimate problem. Okay. The third principle, though, and before that third principle, you might think like, oh, we're doomed. How do we escape this? How could we ever possibly, get around this problem of limitation? The third principle is where the Astronist religion comes in a way, because it states that, well, actually, no, I would say this is where the Astronist philosophy comes in, because it states that, don't worry, we can as human beings, because we are sapient species, because we are an intelligent species, we do possess that potential to escape this limited reality. Okay, so that's where the Astronist philosophy comes in. It states that, don't worry, we can do something about this. And then the fourth principle is where I would say that the Astronist religion comes in, because that principle states that humanity's potential to escape limitation justifies the pursuit of the goal of transcension. So it's really that transcension part that brings in the Astronist religion into the equation. Okay, so those four cosmic principles are obviously essential to understanding the basic sort of logic of astronism. Okay, so observing a reality, identifying the problem with that reality and all the suffering that it's causing us, having the hope that we as a species will be able to escape this reality. And then number four states an actual method, an actual way of doing that, okay? An actual path that we can go along to escape this reality, okay? So that kind of demonstrates that's why I say that it brings in the Astronist religion, because the Astronist religion is telling us how to escape this reality. Okay, so I think that those four cosmic principles are really, really kind of handy, really, to understand the Astronist religion at its most basic fundamental level. So I have done a little bit of analysis here on the first principle. I will just read through some of these analyses, but you can also, you can stop the video and take a read for yourself. The first principle is often referred to as the limitation principle, as I said earlier, and limitation is considered to be kind of evident all around us. Okay, so this is talking about the observation that astronists are making, that limitation is in everything. You can see it, that everything is limited all around us, and I've spoken about this before. It is observable in every animate, so in every living being, and in every non-living being, in every non-living object, shall we say. So the eventual degeneration of all things and the eventual destruction of all inanimate things are considered to be hallmarks of limitation. The fact that, every living thing ultimately decays and dies, and that even every inanimate thing, every inanimate object also at some point will be destroyed. That is seen as the evidence for limitations pervasion throughout the whole of cosmic reality. Okay, so limitedness is considered to be epitomized by the subjection of all things, as I've said, to death, time also, decay and disease, and even to evil and immorality, which are considered to be forms of limitation as well. So limitation is also can therefore be physical, it can be temporal, it can be moral, and it can also be metaphysical as well. As I mentioned earlier, in astronism, we view even things like the soul to be limited. But I'll explain how and why human beings in particular, or even any other sapient species, possess the quality within us to escape limitation. We'll talk about that. So the analysis of the second principle, first of all, the second principle is sometimes referred to as the sufferation principle, because it is linking limitation to sufferation, to sufferance, to evil as well. Okay, so there's that link that is made in the second principle. Cosmic limitation is viewed as the root of all suffering and evil, as I've said, and this belief in astronism is what we call periolatism. This is because if we lived in a perfect realm of infinite space, time, and resources, there would be no reason or means for suffering or evil to exist. It's only because we exist in a limited reality that suffering and evil are so widespread and are able to exist. Okay, suffering and evil would not be able to exist in this sort of infinite divine realm because you are infinite. You don't have those temporal limitations or those limitations in terms of resources that are the cause of suffering and evil. Okay, so that's why we see that's why we make that link between limitation and suffration or evil. It is only because, as I've said, I've kind of already said that, so the blame for the origin of humanity's subjection to suffering and evil is therefore placed on cosmic limitation, but crucially, humanity is responsible for the perpetuation of its subjection to this cosmic reality. So what I'm trying to say there is that yes, cosmic limitation is the cause of suffering and evil, but as a sapient species, humanity is also responsible for continuing this limitation, for perpetuating it, for continuing our subjection to this. And of course, this relates to the idea that human beings have the potential to circumvent limitation, to escape limitation, but that actually we, as human beings, as limited beings ourselves, actually indulge in this limitation and often avert this process of transcension that is obviously central to the Astronist message. Okay, so yes, there is some blame to be placed on cosmic, well, a lot of blame to be placed on cosmic limitation, but also a little bit of blame on human beings ourselves as limited beings for kind of continuing this limitation. This is trying to indicate that really this limitation is not necessarily that we could kind of escape this limitation. We don't actually have to be subjected to it, but that we are continuing this kind of subjection, shall we say. The third principle is often what we call the Astronist principle. And essentially, as you saw before, it constitutes the fundamental claim of both mainly the Astronist philosophy. I've written Astronist religion there, but mainly Astronist philosophy, namely that humanity, in contradistinction to all other sort of species on this planet in particular, possess the capacity and potential to escape cosmic limitation. And as I said earlier, this is the sort of fundamental Astronist philosophical principle that yes, cosmic limitation pervades all things, but that human beings as a sapient species can escape this reality. We have the capacity to do so. We have the potential to do so. We don't need to be stuck in this reality forever. So the principle states human beings possess within them a potentially infinite aspect that just has to be released from its cosmic confinements for human beings to be saved from the sufferings of limitation and all its consequences that I've, of course, listed already in this lecture. Possession of this capacity, which is called scope, this capacity is called scope, is what gives the human race the hope that we need not be subjected to limitation forever and that there is an escape for our species. So Astronism is, you could argue, a very optimistic religion in the sense that, you know, okay, it identifies all cosmic reality to be suffering and evil caused by limitation, but it is also optimistic in the sense that it does kind of have this Astronist principle that yes, we can escape this reality, don't fear, kind of thing, you know, don't worry, we can actually get out of this, we're not going to be stuck here forever, kind of thing, but we just have to kind of follow this transcension process to get out of this. And this is where we come to the analysis of the fourth principle, which is aptly called the transcension principle, which states that because on the basis that there is a possible escape from limitation for the human species, the Astronist religion is founded on the idea that human beings, it's founded on a plan, really, to bring about this human escape from the limited cosmos. And of course, this plan is what we call transcension. The Astronist religion is the embodiment of this plan, and that's why I spend a lot of time talking about transcension, because it is the thing that's going to kind of solve all of our problems, really. It's going to solve this ultimate problem of limitation. So the goal to escape limitation then justifies the central Astronist pursuit of heralding and executing the transcension of humanity. And of course, as well, Astronism attributes kind of salvific capacity to transcension. So it states that in achieving transcension, human beings, humanity, will have achieved salvation. Okay. And of course, transcension is framed as a form of salvation, okay, but also a particular type of salvation in which humanity must save itself. So yes, God has indeed provided us with the capacity for astronality, and so has endowed us with scope, that sort of fundamental capacity that we need to escape limitation. And of course, God continues to provide us with this scope, this opportunity. But that there will be no sort of supernatural events beyond this that will help bring about humanity's transcension. So there will be no incarnation or anything like that. There's no kind of doctrines of incarnation in Astronism. God interacts with human beings, with the cosmos as a whole, through the dispensation of scope only. Okay, and that's how God interacts, and that's quite a strict principle in Astronism. We state that God does interact, does intervene in cosmic reality, but only in a limited way, only in a limited capacity. And I've explained why that is in other videos. Essentially, it's because if God were to kind of intervene in cosmic reality in an infinite way, then that would collapse the cosmic reality. If you can imagine, if an infinite entity came into being here, first of all, that would defy the infinite nature of that being, but also it would cause, to me, a kind of collapse of cosmic reality. How can an infinite being, how can an infinite entity or force or whatever you want to call it exist in a cosmic limited reality or finite reality? So that's the reason why God's interactions with humanity are limited to its dispensation of scope. Okay, so for that reason, humanity must use that knowledge, use that scope, certainly, use God's help in that sense, but also humanity must save itself. So there is there, I think, very much a departure from Christianity, you could argue, because Christianity is all about Jesus as the incarnation, as God coming to save human beings, okay? There's less of an emphasis placed on God in Astronism, even though it is still a religion in that sense. So yes, God has a role, but humanity must save itself. And that form of salvation is what we call extrication, okay? So, of course, there is this problem of limitation, and Astronism essentially sees limitation as the ultimate problem for humanity to overcome. And so the Astronist religion claims to have the method to rectify this ultimate problem. In this regard, Astronism is much like any other religion, because religions often follow a kind of set program where they identify a problem, they emphasize why that problem is important or crucial in some way to humanity, and then they present themselves as the kind of embodiment of the method for solving that problem. Okay, so of course Astronism follows that pattern to a T, really. Is very kind of traditional in that sense. And you can see this pattern being followed in other religions. For example, Christianity identifies and attempts to rectify the problem of sin, meaning disobedience to God, while Buddhism identifies and attempts to rectify the problem of suffering itself, which in the Buddhist religion is seen to be the subjection to the cycle of samsara. Okay, so, but to Astronism, these identifications of sin and suffering are only seen as products of a kind of broader problem of limitation. So even if we manage to get rid of sin, we'd still have other issues because of limitation. We'd still be physically limited, metaphysically limited, and we'd still suffer for that. Okay, so in a way, from the Astronist perspective, you can't get rid of sin or suffering completely if you don't get rid of limitation, essentially. Essentially, limitation is seen to be that kind of ultimate problem that causes all these other problems. So another really important aspect of Astronist philosophy in particular has emerged during my writing of the Astrodoxy, and this is the observation that there is a duality in human nature. Later on, actually at the very end of this lecture, I'll be talking about how Astronism views reality as monistic, so as possessing kind of one nature, which is limitation. And this is still true, this still applies here, and I wouldn't say that this duality of human nature that I'm about to be talking about is a kind of a strict duality in that sense, in the sense that it doesn't contravene the monism of the cosmos. It's more of a duality, or a duality in, shall we say, less substantial terms, and more of an observation of the two different aspects of humanity, rather than kind of a fundamental contravention of that monistic understanding of reality. It's more just an identification of that there are two aspects to the human person. So I just want to make that clear, that Astronism is not a dualistic religion, but we do identify certain contradistinctions in various different things, but in the human nature there is also, even though the human nature is ultimately limited, fundamentally limited, we do have to possess something within us as a sapient species to make that third principle that I was talking about true. There has to be something within us that is distinct from other entities in the cosmos, that provides us with that capacity to potentially escape limitation. Now, that capacity is still limited, so we're not contravening the monism of the cosmos here, because the nature of that thing is still limited, but it has some potential for unlimitation, some potential to be developed into infinite nature. Okay, and this is the duality that I'm talking about here. So this is often called the analytic duality in human nature, and essentially a duality formed in the context of transcension in regards to observations of human nature. So this duality, as I've written, is evident in human thought and behavior. The first side of this duality is what I refer to as scopic nature, and the second side is what I refer to as controversive nature. So humanity's scopic nature was or granted to us or emerged during the event of the scope of man, through which the bestowal of astronality, our capacity to perceive the night sky, and consequently scope itself, were received. Okay, so because we were able to then look up at the night sky, we then had this ability, this capacity to ultimately go out into the night sky, to actually go out into the astronomical world and overcome and conquer limitation, essentially. However, the realities of cosmic limitation, and this is where the monism comes in here, means that even this newly received complement of scope, which could allow human beings to become infinite beings, has to be subjected to limitation in some way. And so the way that it was subjected to limitation emerged in the controversive side of human nature being instilled. So yes, we do have this side of us that has potential and opportunity and possibility, but we also have this other side which is limited. We would rather not do something than do something, for example. We cannot think in an unlimited way. We think very limited and narrow oftentimes. That is an example of the controversive nature of humanity. Controversive just essentially means limited. It's just another word that is used for limited. So the limited nature of human beings, essentially. And so there is this duality in human nature, this potential on one side, this kind of scopic nature, this potential to become infinite, and then also this other side which is limited and indulges in limitation and wants to stay as we are, suffering and kind of indulging in evil, essentially. Okay, so there is this two sides to human nature. The second side, that controversive side, necessarily exists to maintain the monism of cosmic reality. If human nature existed as totally scopic, as totally potentially infinite, then there may be a kind of contravening of cosmic monism, essentially. This idea that there only exists limitation as part of cosmic reality. Okay, that is the cosmic monism. So we can't defy that because that is key to reality and cosmic limitation. But what we can say is that human beings have the potential to become infinite, but that this potential is limited, and that we need transcension to kind of release this unlimited nature of the human person. Okay. And of course, related to all of this, and certainly being influenced by all of these observations about, the cosmic limited reality, etc., is this idea of cosmocentrism. Cosmocentrism may rightly immediately be understood as astronism's focus on the astronomical world, and oftentimes I refer to it as the space worldview, for example. The fact that astronism is a space religion, we kind of focus on outer space, that distinguishes us from other religions. And that would be true. That is part of cosmocentric worldview. But the reason why, and certainly the other aspect of cosmocentric worldview, is astronism's focus on cosmic limitation itself. And this actually comes to the core of what cosmocentrism means. It is essentially, in a way, focusing on cosmic limitation as that ultimate problem, as the ultimate concern for the human species, and that is the embodiment of the cosmocentric worldview, okay? Because what is cosmic is viewed to be limited. And so you could also call this like limit centrism or something like that. We just use the word cosmocentrism. But essentially there are two aspects to the cosmocentric worldview there. Yes, we do focus on outer space in the immediate, more simplistic understanding of the worldview, but then we also do focus on cosmic limitation as that more kind of philosophical, deeper aspect of the worldview, which also shows that there is another duality that results from this cosmocentric worldview, in that all existence can be split between that which is limited and that which is unlimited. So again, and this is also affirmed in the cosmic monism of later on, which I'll be telling you about. So this doesn't deny cosmic monism, but essentially cosmocentrism views realities as you can either be limited, a reality is either limited or it is unlimited. And it can only be one of those things. You can't have a mixture of those two things. And that's where the monism comes in. The monism of cosmic reality is that all cosmic reality is limited. Beyond the cosmic reality, and this is what transcension wishes to get us to get human beings to escape limitation, suffering, and evil, is unlimited. Okay, this is where the divine exists. This is where God resides. This is where the universe is. This is the broader, infinite reality beyond this cosmic limited reality. Okay, and so that's why there is this monism that ultimately prevails in Astronist philosophy. Because you can either be only one of those things. You can't have a reality that is both limited and unlimited, okay? And that, refers back to the cosmocentric worldview. So there's some sort of new contributions that have been made in section 1, particularly regarding like Astronist philosophy, some of those fundamental principles, the cosmocentric worldview. I think also at this stage, it's important to state that, of course, these are not all of the main contributions that have been made in the last few years by myself. Of course, there are many other new aspects to Astronism that I can't include in this lecture right now, because it would be, again, another 1,000 pages long, slides long lecture, and I don't want to do that. But it just gives you an idea of where my mind has been heading, you could argue, where my sort of ideas have been sort of flowing towards, and how they've manifested in these philosophical principles. Okay, so let's look at section 2 now, which of course relates to transcension, Astronism's doctrine of salvation. Okay, so we have this section 2, which is going to sort of explore some new aspects to transcension that have been introduced. And first of all, one of the main things that I spend a lot of my time doing right now is actually trying to describe transcension. And I've referred to this sort of act or attempt to describe transcension as dialepsony. So this is, and it isn't easy either. Transcension can be described in various different ways. It is a concept, and it is a very big concept with lots of different aspects to it, which means that describing it can be a challenge sometimes. And so I refer to that challenge as being dialepsony. and here are just some sort of ways of understanding transcension. So transcension is both a form of salvation, but also a method to achieve salvation as well. In the sense that it's a form of salvation, it is based on the idea that escaping limitation equates to salvation. Okay, so that's where it comes in as a form of salvation on that basis. And then of course it is a method of salvation because it is also talking about going up to the stars and actually escaping cosmic limited reality. So that is, in that sense, it is also a method of salvation too. It sees the continual transcendence of limitations to equate to saving a species from the ultimate problem of limitation, so that the more we overcome limitation and transcend these limitations, even small little limitations in our own personal lives, that is all good practice towards getting rid of this problem of well, not getting rid of it, because you can't get rid of problem of limitation, but you can escape it. And that's what transcension is saying. You can't destroy limitation. So this is maybe the difference between the Christian idea of salvation. So sometimes you might hear that the Christian church wishes to destroy sin, and to kind of conquer sin. We do have that similar idea in Astronism, I suppose, but you can't really get rid of limitation completely. So because it's so intrinsic to cosmic reality as we see it here, we can't get rid of limitation. All we can hope to do is to escape it, to escape that limitation. We can't destroy limitation. Limitation is this reality. So you can't remove the two. They're intrinsic. Because outer space is viewed as an open system, so it's viewed as a place of relative, not infinity, but certainly vastness, that it is a vast realm, it is an open system. It exists in contradistinction to Earth as a closed system as kind of limited resources. Not only limited resources, but scarce resources. I would say that those are two different things. So the open system of outer space, the astronomical world, still has limited resources, but those resources are not scarce. The resources of Earth as a closed system are scarce. They're both limited, but more importantly, they are scarce. Okay. Outer space is viewed, therefore, as the setting for this salvific journey of transcension, because we can use the resource of outer space, the vastness of outer space, to kind of exercise our transcendence of these limitations, okay, our own limitations, by going to the planet, by learning new ideas, receiving new knowledge, becoming a multi-systemic civilization, an interstellar civilization. We can do that, and that's part of this salvific journey of transcension. Okay, so transcension includes, as I've said this before, a process of extrication, the idea that a species must save itself from limitation, irrespective of supernatural intervention, which in astronism is not guaranteed. So yes, God is intervening in the cosmos, and we're going to talk about the theology of the stars or the theology of astronism maybe in the next section or the section after that. So astronism follows a panentheistic theology in that, yes, God is intervening in the cosmos on a regular, continual basis, but that our ability to receive those interventions, to receive the knowledge, to receive the scope that God is dispensing to us is limited, of course. And so our ability to kind of use those interventions as they were intended is not guaranteed and is actually quite limited. We therefore need Astronism to kind of open us up to become more receptive to these divine interventions, to these divine dispensations of scope. So you've got, I've just tried to describe transcension there, and obviously, as you can see, hopefully you guys have understood that, but it can be quite difficult to describe. It is a challenge, I would say, sometimes to describe transcension sometimes, but that's fine. We'll get there. It is a work in progress, you know, and of course, I don't have all the knowledge. Transcension is a progressive revelation, so there will be people in the future that have new knowledge about transcension that will allow them to describe it better than I can even. Okay, so that was a really key thing to understand. The second key thing that has emerged in the last couple of years in particular is this curious doctrine of evitability. So the doctrine of the evitability of transcension, which is sometimes called evitabilism, states that transcension is a form of salvation that is not guaranteed to occur, and so must be worked towards by human effort. In fact, the doctrine implies that if humanity were to continue to its controversion, it is most likely that transcension will not occur. Okay, so in Christianity, for example, because salvation and the events of the Bible and Jesus's incarnation are retrospective, salvation, you could argue, is guaranteed in Christianity. All you have to do is follow Jesus Christ, okay, if you want that salvation. In Astronism, it's a little bit different. Salvation, because it is prospective, salvation has not yet occurred. We do have the means for salvation, but because salvation is more of a process rather than an event like it is in Christianity in terms of the resurrection and crucifixion, it is a bit different for Astronism in the sense that transcension is therefore evitable. Transcension is dependent on human beings overcoming limitation, and so it's dependent on human beings' free will, okay, and using their will to follow the transcensional path. If we don't do that, and if we continue with the controversion, if we continue to avert transcension and move away from it and indulge in that sort of controversive side of the limited nature of our human nature, if you remembered earlier, to that philosophical duality, the analytic duality, if we continue to do that, then it's most likely that transcension will not occur. Okay, so there is a really important aspect there, I think, and this doctrine of evitability, that something may be avoided or is not guaranteed, is actually essential to understanding the difference between transcension as a form of salvation and other forms of salvation that are described in other religions. The evitability doctrine is important because it confirms that transcension is subject to limitation. Of course, the cosmic limitation pervades all things and is also dictated by the cosmic monism principle too. And so therefore, transcension must also therefore be limited. Transcension cannot be unlimited or infinite. It has to be limited. And so therefore, part of that limitation means that it is evitable, that it is not guaranteed. And so transcension is especially vulnerable to temporal limitations. So, for example, human beings have only a certain amount of time to embark upon the transcensional endeavor. If we don't, then we will have lost our chance, if you will. We will have lost the boat. The boat will have gone. So transcension is especially vulnerable to that temporal limitation, which means that it is evitable. And that's a really important aspect and shows how cosmic limitation pervades not only all physical reality, but all conceptual reality in Astronism. It pervades all the concepts and doctrines of Astronism too, and that also, of course, includes transcension. This indeed contrasts with the philosophical proposition that transcension is inevitable, which is a doctrine called inevitabilism. Of course, the philosophical discussion of how transcension is oriented is called the determination of transcension. So it's trying to understand, is transcension guaranteed? Is it predestined? Is it destined and inevitable to take place? Or is it evitable, not guaranteed, not predestined, if you will. And so there is that ongoing debate that's taking place. Of course, my official position, the official position of the Astronist Institution and Astronism itself, you could argue, is this doctrine of evitability. And another alternative view, which kind of relates to the evitability doctrine, but isn't exactly the same, is that transcension is subject to chance, which I think is also another interesting idea. And we call that indeterminationism. Another thing that has also emerged in the course of the development of the Astrodoxy is viewing transcension as revelation. I didn't mention this at all in the Omnidoxy. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've understood transcension to be a form of revelation. Yes, a form of divine revelation among astronists, of course, but also the original divine revelation. And this has come to light through my better understanding of the events of the scope of man, for example, astronality, understanding how that was endowed to human beings, and also the idea of scope as well. And this has kind of brought about this idea that transcension has existed way before astronism, way before me, way before astronism, and actually exists at the very beginning of modern humanity with our endowment of sapience, intelligence, creativity, and scope. But that this revelation, this original divine revelation, has been distorted by limited human interpretations throughout the history of our species. And of course, this revelation of transcension is regarded to be perfect due to its divine origins, but the doctrines of transcension, which emerge as a result of human interpretation of transcension, are considered to be imperfect, as they have necessarily been subjected to transcension, and so therefore are limited, so that they can be subject transcension to limitation, so that it may be comprehensible for the human mind. So yes, transcension is a divine revelation, but it's had to be kind of watered down, you could say. It's had to be made comprehensible for the limited human mind, and so has therefore been, and including my own mind, and has therefore been kind of deconstructed into different parts, into different aspects, in order for transcension to be understood. Otherwise, it cannot be understood. So for the revelation of transcension to be transmitted to the minds of human beings, it must be contaminated by the impurities of limitation. This in turn forms the doctrines of the original perfection of transcension and the necessary limitation of transcension. So this idea that because it's of divine origin, the method of transcension to achieve salvation is considered originally perfect, originally infinite, but as a result of its transmission to the human mind in the cosmic realm, it is deemed to be necessarily limited. It has to be limited in some way for it to be transmitted to the limited human mind, or else we would never be able to comprehend it or just go over our heads. And a lot of the time in human history, it has gone over our heads. It has been misinterpreted, but it is the original divine revelation. And you can see that by looking at sort of the origins of humanity. If you look at the Sideresis and how Astronism sees the origins of modern humans in particular, you will see that transcension is there. Transcension is at the beginning of humanity. When we first looked up at the night sky and received that astronality, we received that scope. As a result, transcension predates astronism. Okay, it's just the fact that astronism has brought about, or has brought more attention, you could say, to the revelation of transcension, has made it its own revelation. It's made its own emphasis on transcension. So, of course, related to this is the idea of the Sideresis. The Sideresis is the grand narrative that Astronism uses. It contextualizes transcension, okay? Itself also, well, so the Sideresis is the grand narrative, but then transcension is the master plan of Astronism for human beings to achieve salvation. And because it is this sort of master plan, it requires extensive explanation through clear presentations via the story of humanity's ascent to sapience and our descent into controversion. So that's what the Sideresis is talking about. It's talking about, it describes a narrative of humanity's origins, how human beings came to exist, how we were bestowed our intelligence, and then also how we kind of descended into controversive thinking because of our limited nature, and even includes things like the scope of man, but also the history of cosmocentric thought, and etc., etc. So it includes a lot of it weaves this kind of story, as I've written there, of astral human relations, that explains the history of humanity's origins and the human course to transcension. So the Sideresis is an ongoing narrative. And of course, Astronism and my founding of Astronism, my ideas, my experiences of astral ecstasy, etc., etc., they are part of the Sideresis. They are the most recent additions to the Sideresis. Okay, so the Sideresis is the ongoing narrative of transcension, essentially. Durationalism is a particular approach to the Sideresis, which states that transcension is divided into different periods, each of which correspond to human progression along the course to transcension, and these include pre-transcension, transcension, and post-transcension. And I think, well, we're going to look at those in probably one of the next slides. So it basically the idea that the Sideresis is split into those different periods, essentially. That's what we call durationalism. That's a sort of particular approach to understanding the Sideresis. So quite a few people who maybe are unlearned about astronism, and particularly about transcension, they don't really get the distinction between transcension and space exploration, those two things. One person recently said to me, well, what is the difference between transcension and space exploration? Is space exploration not just achieving the same things that transcension wants to achieve? And I said no, and I explained why that is the case. And so I wanted to include, as part of the Second Total Immersion, this idea of the distinction between transcension and space exploration, of which there are 6 different reasons. I've actually included I've actually framed these 6 different properties of the distinction between transcension as religious space exploration, from secular space exploration, through the who, what, where, when, why, how framework, because I think it is quite useful. So let's start off. So these 6 different properties are properties of transcension that make it distinct from secular space exploration. That's not to say that space exploration doesn't play a role in transcension. Of course, it is central to transcension, but there are other things that transcension talks about that secular space exploration does not. Okay, so the first of these is the covenant, which is called the sidereinium, or the sidereinia. And this is the who. So this is the agreement among astronists that commits them to transcension. So for transcension to be transcension, it needs to be conducted under the banner of the sidereinium. Okay, it needs to be conducted under this sort of mutual covenant, this commitment, this sort of unity of people under this agreement, this oath to transcension, and that's what unites us together, essentially getting us all on the same page, if you will. Okay, because if we're on different pages, if we're looking at different books, then we're not going to achieve transcension at all. Okay, so it gets us on the same page. Do we have to think uniformly? No, of course not. But the sidereinium just secures the idea of astronist commitments to transcension, essentially, and actually distinguishes the astronist community as a distinct group of human beings, essentially. The other part of transcension, of course, is elevation. So this is the process of transcension, the process that underlies transcension, and this is the what as part of that framework. So this is the essential action of transcension, comprising departation, astronization, but also extrication, really overcoming limitation. Okay, and that's the elevation part. Of course, that is the space exploration section. And so, yes, secular space exploration is engaging in the departation and elevation part, but it also has to be done under the banner of transcension, that we want to go into outer space to ultimately achieve salvation. Okay, to ultimately overcome our limitations. And that's the difference between sort of a transcension and a normal secular space exploration. Essentially, with transcension, there is this definitive goal to achieve salvation. With secular space exploration, it's more about, yes, gaining knowledge, yes, exploring and sort of gaining new resources, certainly, but there isn't that kind of definitive end goal of achieving salvation, which is more of a religious, obviously, idea, which again distinguishes transcension from space exploration. The other part of transcension, of course, is the where, sort of the setting of transcension. So, of course, this must take place in outer space. Outer space is the necessary backdrop of transcension as the intermediary between humanity and divinity. I've spoken about this quite extensively, this idea that the astronomical world is that intermediary between the human and the divine. Okay, so Of course, the Siderean vision is the when, the plan, so the divine intention that certain species would fully potentialize to unlimitedness, to become unlimited. So this is the Siderean vision. This is the vision of God, that we will become, that there will be certain species that will achieve transcension, that will achieve this unlimited existence. Then we also have the transcosmisation. This is the aim of transcension, the why. This is the objective of transcension, to escape limitation by surpassing cosmic existence, by surpassing the cosmic boundary, okay, by surpassing that cosmic, the accelerating edge of the cosmos, essentially. And then finally, the how is scope. This is the currency of transcension. Scope is analytic favor, the means afforded to sapient humanity to achieve transcension. Scope is favor in the sense that it's something that we've not necessarily done anything to achieve, but we still have it, and which signals that we are a preferred species, in contradistinction to all other species on the Earth. So there are other aspects of transcension that are not included in secular space exploration. And so hopefully those 6 different properties of transcension kind of identify those differences. Here, what we've got is the kind of structure of the sideresis. I think I've not included some things there. I should have included those. Sorry about that. Clearly, I've forgot to include some sections there on the scope of man, etc. But essentially, what this diagram shows is those different sort of periods of the transcensional process. You've got the pre-transcension, you've got the transcension itself, you've got the controversion, the coryphasis, the post-transcension stage, and then also, of course, you've got the inevitable events that are going to occur in the cosmos no matter what. So even if we do achieve transcension or we don't, those events are still going to take place, such as the starfall, which is the extinction of humanity, but also the Caesarea, which is the end of the cosmos. The cosmos is limited, and so it is inevitably going to come to an end, whether we achieve transcension or we don't. Okay, and that was kind of explored in the Major Astronis Mechanism 3, so go and take a look at that as well. But that was just an idea of trying to show the durationalist approach to transcension, but also to the structure of the sideresis as well. So, of course, a word that is always keeps coming up is this idea of controversion. So the idea that crucial to the story of humanity's transcension is the subjection of this endeavor to the limited human mind. And I've spoken about this previously, which has in turn caused the controversion. So the controversion is the entire collection of thoughts and behaviors of humanity, as well as our beliefs and practices that have misinterpreted transcension over the course of centuries, but also have actively averted transcension too. The controversion is all that contradicts or contrasts with the cosmocentric understanding of existence, which is likely to include every non-Astronist religion and their institutions. So the concept of the controversion is very broad. It includes a lot of different things. Essentially, anything that is non-transcension or anti-transcension would be considered controversive, and as part of this controversive nature of human beings, and will be considered as part of the controversion. Okay, so again, in the Astrodoxy, I've done a lot more work on trying to not only describe, explore the idea of the controversion, but also to kind of show how this idea is crucial to understanding why humanity exists in the way that we do, particularly in the fact that we have contravened transcension so many times. So we also come to two other ideas that have definitely seen a lot more sort of attention in the Astrodoxy, and that is deonticism and also returnism. So the doctrine of deonticism, which is also called cosmic duty, is the Astronist assertion that human beings, as a consequence of our sapience, possess an innate duty to fulfill ourselves by completing the process of transcension. So essentially, deonticism intertwines the process of transcension with the process of human beings kind of coming to our full potential, fulfilling our full potential. And so it essentially states that human beings have a certain duty, a certain, I think it's deontology that studies duty. We have a certain duty to achieve and pursue and complete transcension. So Astronism espouses the belief in, and this comes more to the returnism part of this slide, Astronism espouses the belief in the astrogenic origins of humankind, meaning that human beings evolved from microbiological life that originated from among the stars, but came here as part of a comet of life that crashed to the Earth and then birthed life from there. So that idea is called, it's a pre-Astronist theory called panspermia. And essentially, astronists use this astrogeny to justify the prophecy of returnism, essentially the idea that human beings must return to the stars because we originally originated from the stars, and that our return to the stars is to fulfill our sort of true intended purpose, if you will. So it kind of relates back to that idea of the cosmic duty doctrine. And so returnism is a prophecy of astronism. It's one of the main prophecies, and it is epitomized by the transcensional axiom of from where we came, so shall we return. And so that's a sort of phrase that I use quite often. I've included in the Astrodoxy quite a lot. And I think it is just quite a handy little axiom to say, to kind of imply that humanity should return to the stars, essentially. I'm not going to go through all of these disciplines. I've included here a list of disciplines that have emerged as part of my writing of the Omnidoxy. Of course, I'm exploring all of these different disciplines as part of my writing of the Astrodoxy. These different disciplines explore various different aspects of transcension. So what I would do is maybe just pause the video now and just take a little look at this list of what I refer to as astrodoxical disciplines. They are astrodoxical because they are first emerged or talked about in the Astrodoxy, which is obviously an upcoming treatise of mine, so it's not been published yet, but it is coming, don't worry. And so these different disciplines kind of just organize the various different aspects of transcension. And then, of course, another thing to state is that, of course, these are only just some of the disciplines that I've picked out. There is also a lot of other disciplines too that have been included in the Astrodoxy. So now we'll move on to section 3, where we're going to be looking at another major sort of new aspect of transcension particularly, but also broader astronism as well. And those are the analyptic confirmants. Okay, so we've got this, first of all, this idea of peripherancy. So when you read the Astrodoxy eventually, you will see that peripherancy collectively refers to all the complements of transcension that are identified, especially regarding their study and their different uses in relation to the achievement of transcension. Okay, so periphranism, which is kind of a related term, I know, which is also referred to as conformentalism, is the related belief that the analytic complements are central to human beings in practically completing transcension. So in Astronist Institution's official interpretation of transcension right now, it does hold to this sort of conformentalist view that these sort of elements of the human person, but also these tools that we have identified, that we have at our disposal, that they are central to achieving transcension, and that we cannot achieve it if we don't use these complements. So that's why there is a particular emphasis that is placed on these complements in the Astronist Institution's view, and in my view too. So let's just go through some of these complements. Of course, we've got scope, which I've talked about quite a lot. Scope is the unmerited opportunity of the present moment to overcome limitation, and it's seen as a form of divine favor. Astronality is the innate quality that allows human beings to perceive the night sky. Okay, so this distinguishes us from other species on this planet, the fact that we can observe the night sky and relate this to our imagination, our belief, our thoughts and ideas. That's something that other species cannot do. And so the capacity for astronality is seen in astronism as being sort of central, really, to harnessing that scope, harnessing that divine favor that we've been given. If we only had scope without the astronality, we wouldn't know where to place that opportunity, where to apply that scope in our lives. And of course, we've got to apply it to the astronomical world. Stellancy is also another complement, and essentially the idea that we can master this sort of aspect of ourselves in the form of astronality. We can master our perceptions of the night sky to produce new knowledge. And of course, that's what I'm doing right now in the development of the Astrodoxy. I am producing new knowledge, and I'm working towards the mastery of my astronality. And I've received knowledge as a result of that. I've received new knowledge, new terms, new ideas, new beliefs as a result of my perceptions of the night sky, my meditation of the night sky, my prayers to the night sky, etc., etc. Some people may see that as crazy, strange, these kind of practices, but they are essential, really, to any kind of personal transcension, which is definitely also important to any collective human-wide transcension as well. So I would say that they are the three sort of central complements. Then you've also got a few other complements as well, 5 other ones to be exact. You've got propellants, merited scope, sidereunium, reception, and afflation. I'm not going to go through them because I think that it might just be easier for you guys just to pause right now and just take a look at some of the descriptions that I've given. But I think that if you've got a good understanding of those first 3 complements, then you'll get a pretty good, easier understanding of some of those later complements as well. Because some of those later complements they are kind of products of the first 3 complements. Okay, so I would still say, though, that the analytic complements are still essential to transcension. I follow that sort of conformentalist point of view, which sees these identified tools as being essential to achieving transcension. I've also gone into much greater depth in the Astrodoxy about what a confirmant has to sort of constitute, what constitutes a confirmant. And again, there are sort of various important characteristics. What I would say is that confirmants are not physical, they are abstract, and so pertain to states, conditions, or conditions of being. Confirmants are either bestowed beyond human capacity, so they are unmerited. So they may be bestowed by God, for example, or they are self-bestowed through human effort. And you can, if you took a look at some of those later confirmants, you can see that some of those are brought about through human effort rather than just being divinely bestowed to us. Confirmants resemble a likeness to transcension that approximates human nature to analytic nature, to transcension nature. All the confirmants are purposed around the increase of scope as being the kind of principal confirmant, because without scope, we couldn't have all the rest of those confirmants, and also astronality too. Therefore, confirmants are not merely representatives or significations of scope, but are scope themselves, just in a range of different forms, essentially. Confirmants are efficacious in progressing transcension, meaning that they have a sidereinical effect. They have an effect on the economy of transcension, which I did a whole other lecture on as part of this season 4. I can't quite remember what episode it was right now, but it was one of the very, very earlier episodes of this season where I looked at the economy of transcension. So what I'm trying to say there is that confirmants have and sort of an important role to play in the economy of transcension. So there are certain sort of important characteristics there that kind of make a confirmant, that kind of form this idea of confirmentality. We also have what I refer to as suraments. While the purpose of confirmants is to naturalize scope, to instill scope as part of our nature, the purpose of suraments is to actualize scope, to either manifest or signify scope materially in the world. So as I mentioned, as part of the confirmentality part, confirmants are not physical. They are abstract. They are often sort of things within the human person. They are qualities or conditions rather than sort of material things. Whereas suraments or suramentality is sort of material manifestations of scope or significations of scope. Suramental philosophy aims to understand the suraments, and there are quite a few different suraments. We've got the surosia, which is a ritual, of course. We're looking at that in other lectures as part of this season, but also as a further section in this lecture. We also have the idea of the prismata, the invocation of the cosmized. You can pause and take a look at some of these. Further suraments include reastrance, dilosation, deathbed astrosis, and also confirmation of astrosis too. So you've got the confirmants and you've got the suraments, okay? And these are all really quite central to achieving transcension, and they're ways of both sort of receiving scope, but also manifesting that scope in the world. Okay, so certainly the analytic confirmants and the analytic suraments are central to any achievement of transcension. As part of the Astrodoxy, I have also been exploring the philosophy of scope, which I refer to as scope theory. So scope theory is the body of ideas produced by Astronists to understand scope from different perspectives. This is indeed distinct from the official sort of institutional perspective on scope that is espoused in the Astronist religion, that is often much more rigid and kind of less philosophical, you could say, less sort of, you could say, has different aspects to it, you could argue. has less aspects to it, just one sort of more definitive understanding of scope, whereas the philosophy of scope is a little bit more philosophical. It sort of understands different aspects of scope. Scope theory not only attempts to understand the nature, divine origins, and function of scope, but also intends to explain the mechanics and overall importance of the event of the scope of man. Scope itself is also an ontological concept and upholds an important role in the Astronist ontology, which again is included. All of these ideas and explorations of scope are included in the upcoming Astrodoxy. So the philosophy of scope essentially wishes to establish a complete understanding of the sidereinical function of scope, so as a form of divine intervenience. So what I'm trying to say there is that it's trying to understand the role of scope and its functions in the economy of transcension. And that is the real aim of the philosophy of scope. And part of that sort of aim of the philosophy of scope is the determination of scope. So one of the main philosophical debates regarding scope in light of the evitability doctrine of transcension that I talked about earlier on is whether or not scope was predetermined by God for humanity to receive, and if so, the implications for this regarding the veracity of evitabilism. So there are different interpretations of how scope came to be. Again, I'm not going to go through these. You can pause the lecture here and just take a look at some of those different ways. Currently, the main Astronist interpretation is that scope is predetermined but is not subject to free will. This view is what we call redeterminationism. And I've gone into a bit more depth here. So I'll read this slide because it's talking more in depth about the position that the Astronist Institution takes. So redeterminationism is one of three contrasting approaches to the structure of the sideresis, oriented midway between determinism and indeterminism. At its core, it affirms the doctrine of returnism, that transcension is humanity's destiny, yet limits this doctrine by establishing the caveat that scope is necessary to the fulfillment of this prophecy, because it understands destiny's jurisdiction as only pervading events and phenomena external to the mind, because human beings have free will, of course. As a result, by the very nature of the conferment of scope, multiple possible outcomes for humanity's future are established that are entirely subject to human action or inaction, so essentially are subject to free will. This, in turn, subjects the endeavour of transcension to correct human engagement with scope, and so therefore makes transcension subject to human free will. Okay, so essentially what the redeterminationism doctrine is trying to achieve is it's trying to still affirm the prophecy of returnism, the idea that it is humanity's destiny to return to the stars via transcension, but is also trying to factor in the importance of not only the doctrine of limitation, but also the doctrine of free will as well. Essentially, redetermination sees humanity's transcension as its purpose, but as not inevitable. So it brings in that evitability doctrine, of course, particularly as it rejects the pervading characteristics of destiny that are traditionally attributed to it. Because, of course, destiny itself must be limited in some capacity or degree in order for it to exist in the limited cosmos. So redetermination has been described as a compatibilistic doctrine, one that affirms fate but limits its powers to environmental factors. Okay, so again, there is that compatibilism element of the redetermination approach. So go and take a look, I would say, at compatibilism, get a good understanding of that first, because that's not a particularly Astronist originating doctrine. Go and take a look at that, and then come back to take a look at the Astronist doctrine of redeterminationism. Again, other forms of determinationism you can see here. So you've got predeterminationism, the redetermination that I've already spoke about, but then you've also got indeterminationism as well. So I'll pause the screen here and take a look at some of those other forms of determination of scope. We've also got explanations of scope, which have been tried to, achieved during the course of the Astrodoxy so far. There are sort of three main explanations of scope. The first, and these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, they do kind of interact with one another. They can all exist at the same time and be true. But the first one is that scope is a product of divine intervenience, namely that scope is a product of the consistent interventions of the divine into the cosmos, which is affirmed, in the panentheistic theology of Astronism. We've also got this idea of cosmic consciousness, that scope is part of the systematic evolution of the cosmos to bring about the transcension of species, which is also could be interpreted and is interpreted as the intention of God or the intention of the divine. You've also got the idea of scope being explained as a phenomenon of human action and behavior. So this kind of leans more into sort of the Astronist ontology of scope, and how scope effectuates processes in the world, essentially. Scope is seen as the antithesis of limitation, in that scope embodies opportunity, which can be unlimited, and thereby defies or otherwise extends beyond cosmic limitation. Of course, cosmic limitation still limits scope, but scope itself, in its core nature, has the ability to be unlimited. And so that is what gives human beings the possible ability to become unlimited beings. Okay, and of course that's central to the Astronist endeavor. Also, during the Astrodoxy, I've tried to do a little bit more of philosophical exploration of astronality. So the idea that astronality is the embodiment of the human person, of a wonderment, that which exists beyond the terrestrial. So I've tried to explore astronality from a philosophical perspective in different ways. Astronality is the connection, the human connection to what is taking place in the astronomical world. It connects us to the intermediary between humanity and divinity, which is, of course, the astronomical world. The philosophy of astronality is epitomized in the Astronist religion, namely that this quality in every human being must be pursued and understood if the human species is going to achieve transcension. Astronality is our sapient's ability to relate what we perceive among the stars to our position and condition in cosmic existence. And then finally, astronality occupies a particular aesthetic, an appreciation within the human person of the vastness of the astronomical world. And so in service to the grand astronomical world, Astronists laud this to be the setting of humanity's journey to salvation. And of course, as part of that laudation, also includes the idea that the astronomical world is the intermediary between the human and the divine. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, one of the analytic complements, is stellancy. And I refer to this also as being the mastery of one's astronality. So as a set of emotions, astronality can be applied and mastered with varying effects, particularly regarding the endeavor of transcension. Essentially, it is the task of the astronist to harness the astronality quality within themselves in new and profound ways in order to progress not only one's own personal transcension, which is called astrosis, but the broader collective transcension of humanity. The intrigue that the quality of astronality that is endeavourably endowed in every human being sparks in the Astronist is a pursuit to enhance and master this quality through various we call them proximative practices. These are ways, practices, that are considered to approximate the individual to the astronomical world, again, as the astronomical world being the intermediary, that sort of necessary intermediary between humanity and divinity. Okay. So again, we'll now move on to section 4 of the Second Total Immersion into Astronism. And it is in this section where we'll be looking at soteriology, essentially the Astronist moral code, and essentially the idea of what is right and wrong behavior from an Astronist point of view. Okay, so the transcension is the central doctrine of Astronism. We know this already. And so it then logically follows that transcension is going to have a very big impact on the Astronist understanding of morality and ethics. This is what I refer to as soteriology. Soteriology is morality in the context of transcension, and it also constitutes Astronism's broader moral axis, because achieving transcension is the ultimate goal, aim of the Astronist religion, and so therefore whatever progresses transcension is seen as moral, and whatever regresses transcension is seen as immoral. On this basis, soteriology presents a collection of values set forth in Astronism. These values constitute Astronist axiology, and that these values stand in accordance with the code of ethics of transcension. So these values essentially establish the ethics of transcension, really, in what will progress and what will regress transcension. And so that's what a lot of time we spend doing, is trying to determine what actions we think will progress this endeavor and which ones will regress this endeavor. These actions are most often oriented on what delimits, so what reduces the limits, and what imposes the limits on human beings. For example, any behavior that limits the self or others, or harms others in some way, is likely to be considered immoral. Just as a general rule. So there's a lot more to discuss as part of soteriology, and I have done that as part of the Astrodoxy. I've committed quite a lot of time to exploring every different aspect of soteriology. Still more to do, still more knowledge to try to receive and try to decipher, but we are getting there. There is a sort of better understanding now of morality in Astronism, or Astronist morality. So the integration of transcension with morality elevates transcension to a sacred status that attributes a sense of religious and moral importance to the transcensional endeavor. This is a view that I call sostism, or sostism. This is the idea that transcension is a sacred endeavor, and that this is why this sort of forms the rationale for transcension to be the basis of Astronist morality. Soteriology is a multifaceted ethical system. Astronist, and so relates to Astronist ethics, in that Astronist ethics is both a virtue ethic, which is when virtue is equated with the progression of transcension to form a transcensional ethic, but it's also a deontological ethic, in the sense that it's a system that emphasizes duty, especially in Astronism, the duty to undertake an incomplete transcension for the sake of salvation. So there is that virtue ethic, but also that deontological ethic as well, that sort of form the foundations of soteriology. Soteriology also incorporates certain elements of natural ethics, so that's such as an action is natural, as well as predestined ethics as well, that transcension is the destiny of humankind, as a means to reinforce statements dispensed regarding ethics, morality, and conduct. So certain activities that may be considered moral may be referred to as being natural. Certain aspirations, like transcension itself, may be referred to as being the destiny of humanity. This is, of course, referred to as predestined ethics, to try to influence, encourage certain behavior in a certain direction, if you know what I mean, which of course is the basis of all morality and ethics. So determining serenality isn't necessarily an easy thing to do. The determinants of good and bad behavior in serenality are based on what progresses and regresses transcension. We know this, but the concepts of progression and regression remain highly vulnerable to being relativized. So basically the idea that, well, what one person sees as progression, another person may see as regression. And so in this sense, these two concepts may be made subjective. So it's the role of the system of serenality to establish a clear understanding of progression and regression when it comes to transcension. The disciplines of procology and opistology deal with the study of good and bad behavior, respectively. And disserenality is indeed the inverse of serenality and denotes the set of values, ideas, and worldviews contrary to or deemed to regress transcension. Disserenality is often embodied by the concept earlier on that I spoke about called the controversion. That is the whole sort of embodiment of anything that is contrary to or regresses transcension. Okay, so we've got, again, some interesting philosophical debates that are ongoing in how we determine serenality, and it isn't always easy. I also wanted to include this interesting idea here called the distinction of worlds. As I was going through the Astrodoxy, trying to pick out sort of things that I think people would find interesting or most important, I found this idea, which is the idea that of a philosophical division of existence, really, into four quadrants. The physis, which is the natural world, the sideresis, which is the analyptic world, the anthroposis, which is the sapient world, and then the divinosis, which is the divine world. So I just thought it was quite maybe an interesting way of distinguishing reality into four different aspects from a very much a transcensional point of view. So the establishment of serenality is a manifestation and could argue to be the principle, the pinnacle of the Astronist meaning system, which is the set of goals, values, purposes, and focuses of the Astronist religion and philosophy. Serenality is central to Astronist attempts at meaning making. So Astronist values, purposes, etc., they provide us with meaning to life, essentially, in Astronism. And of course, that is directly related to the ideas of transcension as salvation. So this meaning system for Astronism is indeed oriented around the completion of transcension. And so because the highest level of meaning in life is attached to transcension, good and bad actions are determined on whether they are perceived to progress or regress the transcensional process. Okay, so that explains why transcension is considered to be the center of Astronist morality. Transcension establishes a new morality, and it's a new course of action for humanity based on the Astronist value system of astroaxiology. Astronost axiology is the Astronist study and consideration of value. There is no greater or more solemn purpose, for example, than the endeavor to create the grand world. The aimless course of action that humanity is currently embarked upon, which is embodied by the controversion, is thereby redirected with the establishment of the analyptic vision, a vision for the future of humankind among the stars and working to materialize the grand world. As I've said earlier, Meaning making is central to this function of surreality. So, and this comes to the idea actually of nihilism, which is philosophically opposed to astronism. So if nihilism is the belief that nothing in the world, including the world itself, has any true purpose, then transcensionism contrasts with nihilism by stating that the purpose of all things is to reach the ultimation with the amount of time and scope afforded to it. Okay, so human beings should aim to achieve our ultimate condition with the time and resources that we have been given. Okay, this may not even mean that we will achieve transcosmisation, but it just means that we have fulfilled our greatest potential with the time and limited resources that we have available to us, essentially. And this is the Astronist meaning of life. Of course, the transcensional endeavor has the ideal that, you know, that we've got enough scope that we can, and that we can get more scope, that we can achieve transcosmisation. And that's, of course, the sort of goal of the Astronist religion. So Astronism derives all value in the world from the endeavor of transcension, which is why transcension is the central doctrine of the Astronist religion. What does not support or contribute to transcension will be regarded either neutrally or negatively from the Astronist perspective. Okay, so I think that's really important to understand sort of Astronist attitudes to different events taking place in the world. The Suronal code of behaviors and conduct is based on the underlying principle that transcension is a process of salvation, and so to be saved or redeemed, actions must be performed in certain ways to ensure the salvation takes place. Of course, directly related to all of what I've said so far is the section 5 topic of the theology of the stars, which is essentially another way of saying the theology of astronism, essentially. So divinity in astronism is what all creation subsists and proliferates from, while also divinity exists independently from its limited creations. Divinity intervenes in its cosmoses, but does not interact or manifest except in its bestowal of scope for the purpose of uniting to its preferred sapient beings at the end of time. The conception of divinity in astronism is strictly non-anthropomorphized, and so God is considered to be genderless, is attributed no emotion nor any functions of judgment, which of course directly contrasts with the God of Abraham. Instead, transcension acts as the judgment for all sapient beings. And so transcension takes on that sort of judgmental role for God, essentially. So God has instituted transcension to be the judgment of the worthiness of sapient beings, essentially. The divine is infinite and so is formless, but is also omniscient and omnipotent. So the divine knows all things, but also the divine has all power as well. Divinity is a property that embodies divinity, while that's weird. Divinity is a property that embodies, I don't know if that's true, but while soteriology is a property that embodies the potential for divinity. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so divinity is the embodiment of divinity. I know that sounds silly, but the reason why I say that is because the property of soteriology is the potential for divinity. And of course, that's what we as human beings, as sapient species, have within us in the form of our scope and astronality. That is our soteriology. That is our potential to become divine, to reach divinity. These are both contrasted with cosmicity, which is the property of limitedness, which is, of course, everything we see around us in this world. Everything is limited all around us. And so that is the sort of property of cosmicity. So you've got divinity, soteriology, and then cosmicity. Divine communicability is really important. So the aim of theological discourse in Astronism is to understand the nature of divine intervenience. I would say that this is probably the most important topic of discussion, theological discussion in Astronism. This is because divine intervenience is the primary mode of divine cosmic intervention in light of Astronism's adherence to panentheism. And so the goal of this theological discourse is to capture this intervenience whenever it occurs. So the goal of Astronists in relation to God is to capture, to receive as much as of this intervenience as possible. So it's about being open and receptive to God's intervenience. As the product of divine intervenience is considered to be scope, understanding the phenomenon of scope is essential to Astronist philosophy, and so is understanding the means through which this scope is received, which is through the capacity of astronality, on the basis that scope is dispensed through the astronomical world, okay, by the divine, because the astronomical world is the intermediary between humanity and divinity. And how do we know that? Well, we can see it. It is physically the intermediary between what is divine and beyond cosmic limited existence. So hopefully at this stage, you get a better understanding of not only Astronist theological beliefs, but why we believe certain things about God and also scope and the astronomical world from this sort of theological explanation. So as I said, Astronism adheres to panentheism, which is one of the lesser known theisms. It's one of the lesser known theologies. And it essentially is the belief in a God who exists independently of its creations of the universe, yet includes and continuously interpenetrates the cosmos, its limited created entities, essentially. So that distinguishes Astronism's panentheism from regular theism, in that panentheism sees God as both encompassing the universe as well as existing independently of it, while theism, or general monotheism, asserts that God does not encompass the universe but exists as a separate being that regularly intervenes in human affairs. So the God of Astronism, sometimes referred to as the God of transcension or the divine, intervenes in limited cosmic existence from its infinite divine existence and serves to dispense scope for sapient beings to receive so that they may unite with divinity at the end of time via the process of transcension. Divine intervenience is the phrase used in Astronism to refer to each singular intervention of the divine in the cosmos, namely each time the divine lowers itself, its own nature, which is called circumscription, to dispense scope to human beings. So scope literally is divinity, but just in a limited, watered down version, really. Divine intervenience is the only form of interaction between God and human beings, according to Astronism, and so Astronism rejects any doctrine of incarnation or supernatural apparitions, which obviously you do find in sort of Christianity, for example, and various other religions as well. So Astronism would deny those kinds of doctrines on the basis that God only intervenes or interacts with humanity through this capacity for scope. So co-action is a term that is used in the Astrodoxy, and it refers to the willing acceptance of divine interveniences and one's cooperation with them whenever they do occur and whenever they are received. The providence of God is accepted when transcension is progressed. This is a hard word to say, but it's called apatheism, I think it's called, is the belief that the function of divine intervenience renders unnecessary human mediation between individuals and the divine. So sometimes you'll see this in certain Protestant schools of Christianity, this idea that you don't really need a priest And actually, no, maybe not in Protestantism, but you will find it in Islam. This idea that an imam isn't really an intermediary for humans and God. And you can find that as well in Astronism. Astronists can have a direct communication with God, a direct sort of interaction with God without needing any human mediation. So that gets rid of things like shamanism, but also things like well, you wouldn't engage in confession anyway in Astronism, but gets rid of things like, confession in the Catholic faith, for example, where you need the priest to kind of mediate your relations with God. There is nothing like that in Astronism. You can have a direct relationship to God through scope. Okay. Of course, other people can help you in that relationship, of course, but you don't need them for that relationship. Okay. There is also this other idea of analytic theandry, which is the coming together in joint agency of humanity and divinity for the purpose of transcension, which I find quite interesting. So it's kind of bridging that gap between divinity and humanity that currently exists. Divinity is so far away from us. It's so opposite to what we are in every way. Transcension is about bridging that gap. And that idea of bridging the gap is what we call analytic theandry. We also have this idea, which is really important, and I've referred to this multiple times already, of astronomicalism. Again, there are many different terms that are used in reference to this idea, but astronomicalism is just the term I've used now. Astronomicalism describes that the astronomical world constitutes a portal to divinity, which also corresponds to the doctrine of astrotheism. So astronomicalism kind of, again, affirms this idea that the astronomical world is an intermediary between humanity and divinity. Discussed in the later part is the ritual of the Soteriology as the process of opening up the portal to divinity through which scope may then be dispensed to receptive sapient beings more easily. This intervenial function of the Soteriology ritual thereby founds Soteriology theology, which rests on the notion that the Soteriology ritual is itself a portal to divinity, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the section on Soteriology. Astronomicalism and astrotheism indeed presuppose not only that the astronomical world possesses a metaphysical dimension, but is also imbued with a sort of natural number of spiritual and mystical capabilities. The sum total of these spiritual functions is called the prismata. So, of course, this is the idea that the astronomical world does possess a metaphysical aspect to it, and because of that, human beings can engage with the astronomical world in various spiritual and mystical ways. I've done this myself through the astral ecstasies that I've experienced and talked about, and the sum total of these spiritual functions is what we call the prismata. Just going back to intervenience for a moment and the mechanics of this. So to explain the mechanics of intervenience, we come to the doctrine of circumscription. So this is the idea that God, as an infinite being, must lower itself to limited existence in the form of scope in order to avoid collapsing the limited cosmos. So this is the idea that it is important to distinguish that God need not limit itself. So God's not being told that it has to limit itself. God could do, because God can do anything. God's an infinite being, of course. But, of course, God chooses to do so, chooses to limit itself through the form of scope to preserve the cosmos, okay? But also to set up the endeavor of transcension. If God could sort of manifest to us and bring us in unity with God straight away, there would be no need for the process of transcension, which is essential for judging the worthiness of a species to unite with divinity. So the elevation of the nature of something from limitedness to limitlessness is called acroscription. So there is kind of a two-way street to divinity. Divinity can come down to the human level, but also humans can go up to the divine level. Of course, it's much easier for God as an infinite being to lower itself temporarily to limited existence in the form of scope, but it is far more difficult for a limited entity such as a human person or even a species as a whole to elevate itself to limitless existence. And of course, this process is regarded as achievable only by the salvific journey of transcension. Another really important aspect of sort of the theology of the stars, of Astronist theology, is the idea of manipulating scope. So the manipulation of scope is the ability of a soul and consciousness, while in the overworld, to receive scope from God to effectuate change in their species' course to transcension. Manipulating scope essentially allows for the post-corporeal influence of transcension, which makes this ability essential to transcension's completion and also highlights the metaphysical dimension of this salvific process. It is a doctrine which states, the manipulation of scope is a doctrine which states that in addition to scope's existence in the world of the living, scope also exists in the world of the dead, namely between the stages of cosmisation, corporeal death, and cosmic cessation, which is the end of the cosmos as a whole. There are two ways of viewing the manipulation of scope, namely in the form of scopic exclusivism and scopic universalism. The former states that a person's achievement of astrosis during their lifetime is essential to them receiving the ability to manipulate scope in the afterlife, while the latter view, which is scopic universalism, states that the soul and consciousness of all sapient beings can manipulate scope in the overworld, regardless of their achievement of astrosis. So the exclusivist position is currently professed in the Astronist religion to explain both the emphasis, why there's been such an emphasis placed on achieving astrosis, and to explain why transcension has stalled before Astronism was founded. So the Astronist Institution currently professes that doctrine of scopic exclusivism in order to emphasize why astrosis or individual transcension is really essential to achieving any kind of collective transcension. Of course, also central to divine intervenience is analytic knowledge. So one of the main reasons for divine intervenience in the cosmos is so that God may impart analytic knowledge, which is what I call afflation. God imparts this afflation to human beings through the mechanism of scope. This afflation is deemed to support and guide human beings in their personal and in their collective endeavors for transcension. And we also have a few other doctrines here. We've got this doctrine of extipathism, which is the doctrine that afflation is bestowed by the astronomical world, typically through divine intervenience. We've also got siderecism, which is the doctrine that supernatural phenomena originates from the astronomical world through divine intervenience. And then also we've got this idea of theosopharianism, which is the doctrine that those who achieve astrosis were predetermined by divine intervenience to do so. So those are just some doctrines, ideas that I've sort of played around with in the Astrodoxy. Of course, that's not all of them, but I just picked out a few to include in the Total Immersion 2, just to give you an idea of some of the ideas that I'm thinking about as I'm composing the Astrodoxy. So just to reflect on the role of God in astronism, because the astronomical world is seen as the intermediary between humanity and divinity, astronists look towards the stars for divine intervenience to take effect on human affairs, which is actually a very prehistoric, ancient idea. It's a very, very old idea, and you all need to go back and look at the origins of the astronic tradition and even the origins of astronomy's relation with religion to kind of to see how human beings have always looked up towards the stars for some kind of divine intervenience. So astronism is just continuing this very prehistoric original revelation, essentially. That's why sometimes I refer to transcension as being the original revelation. So the key for astronist practice is mastering our receptivity to these instances of divine intervenience. Acts of divine intervenience are also considered to have singularly progressed humanity's transcension. Divine intervenience in progressing transcension and the operation of divine intervenience in our limited existence supports and guides the construction of transcensia as the kingdom of transcension among the stars. Okay, so there's quite a lot of there to take in. Maybe just pause it now and just take a look at some of those reflective notes of the role of God in astronism. We also have as well this idea of the divine endowment of transcension. So one of the principal questions in astronist philosophy right now is whether or not God has sort of endowed, has validated humanity's transcension, or is otherwise guiding this process of transcension through divine intervenience. And so it is the view of the Astronist religion and the Astronist Institution that God has indeed endowed transcension as the one true, I put one two path, it should be the one true path to salvation. In fact, the Astronist religion sees transcension as the original and true form of salvation that has been distorted, suppressed, or otherwise misinterpreted by the limited and controversive human mind. Belief in the divine endowment of transcension is to be justified through the ability of astronists to receive scope, to experience astral ecstasy and indrasy, for example, and to receive analytic knowledge, each piece of which supports further revelation of the transcensional truth. Okay, so that was section 5. We'll now move on to section 6, which regards the astronic tradition, which essentially has the role of contextualizing astronism. Okay, so we've got this idea of the astronic tradition, and I've spoken quite extensively about this. You can go and take a look at my master's dissertation called Astronomy and the Origins of Religion for quite a lot of the archaeological evidence for the astronic tradition, the explanation of the astronic tradition in relation to other religious traditions. So go and take a look at that. It's available online, Astronomy and the Origins of Religion. This section of Total Immersion 2 is actually going to start off by looking at the sidereality of the astronic tradition. And what I mean by that is the sidereal value or importance of the astronic tradition in the context of the economy of transcension. That's what sidereal means. When I use the word sidereal, I'm talking about in the context of the economy of transcension, in the context of the endeavor to achieve transcension. So, of course, the astronic tradition has major sidereal value because of its archaeological evidence and the anthropological statements that the astronic tradition necessarily makes. This sidereal value emerges in the evidence for the astronic tradition's Paleolithic origins and its fluctuations in popularity throughout human history are reflected in the story of the Sideresis, sometimes called the Sideretic story of humanity's receipt of astrality and scope, and our subsequent descent into controversion. So what I'm trying to say there is that the history of the Astronic tradition directly mirrors the story of the Sideresis that is told in Astronism. So, for example, when human beings originally looked up at the night sky and had various different astronomical religions, such as star worship, astromancy, divination by the stars, I mean by that, and also things like moon worship, etc., etc., these were suppressed by later religions that came along, later philosophies that came along to try to get rid of them, essentially, and that this has taken place throughout human history. Any group that has shown any kind of preference for a space religion or cosmocentric religion has always been suppressed by what is referred to in Astronism as the controversion, as those religions and philosophies that do not hold a cosmocentric worldview, that do not place any importance on outer space or the stars at all, and that this is reflected in humanity's descent into controversion, which is what we talk about in the Sideresis, and that the evidence for the Sideresis can be found in the archaeological and anthropological statements and the archaeological evidence of the Astronic tradition. So there is great Sidereity for the Astronic tradition, essentially, and that provides it with an important role in the development of transcension. So, as I said earlier, tracing the Astronic tradition to prehistoric Aurignacian culture helps to corroborate the Sideretic story now, but was indeed partly the influence for the Sideresis itself. By this, the Sideresis did not simply appear out of thin air, but is instead grounded in archaeological evidence and anthropological logic regarding the origins and development of human sapience and our relationship to the night sky. The Astronic tradition, in turn, provides some context to the Astronist religion by stating that while Astronism was founded by Cometan in 2013, it does belong to a much longer lineage of religions and beliefs that stretch back to prehistoric times, and of which Astronism is just the most recent manifestation. Okay, so all of this has implications for the Sideresis narrative, and also has an important function in explaining the history of human transcension. Okay. So, of course, as well, the Astronic tradition plays a really important role in contributing a new theory for the origins of religion. This is called the Astronist theory for the origins of religion, which uses archaeological and anthropological evidence to justify its explanation. Essentially, the Astronist theory for the origins of religion states that religion can be traced back to humanity's observations of the night sky and the attribution of the sun, the moon, the stars, and other astronomical phenomena with possessing divine function, or in some way seeing the night sky as the abode of the spirits of the dead, or that these astronomical phenomena possess some kind of spirituality to them. So there's that kind of cosmic animism, if you will. Okay, so there is an Astronist theories for the origins of religion there. I am working on a journal article that is going to be dedicated to sort of explaining and justifying this Astronist theory for the origins of religion in more detail, in a more academic format. So look out for that later on this year, or maybe early next year, depending on how I fare in getting that done. We also then, of course, have a really important motif, probably the most important motif of the early Astronic tradition, which is astromorphism. Astromorphizing involves attributing astronomical phenomena, especially those constellations and asterisms, to terrestrial phenomena such as human beings, animals, or inanimate objects. Astromorphism is a motif evident in the early Astronic tradition during the Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic periods. And its prime embodiments being in rock art depicting constellations attributed to animals or other terrestrial objects at the time. So an example of astromorphism would be the annotated Great Star Bull of the Lascaux Caves. Go and take a look at that online. You can see that the Taurus constellation has been kind of overlaid by a depiction of the bull to kind of suggest that the influence of the stars on the bull, for example, also Orion as a constellation being used to represent the man. So astromorphism essentially states that there is an underlying belief to some of these rock art paintings that states that that there is some kind of influence that the stars have, that extraterrestrial world has on the terrestrial world. Okay. Another important aspect of the Astronic tradition is the idea of the first astronaut. So a title attributed to an unspecified member of the Aurignacian people group living in Europe during the Upper Paleolithic period of the Stone Age, during which, to current understanding, the experience of astronality is considered to have first occurred, as based on archaeological evidence from the time. This individual is also given the names Prayer or Prayan. Astronists might trace their belief lineage to this individual as the unwitting founder of Astronism. So this is referring to really the scope of man and the subsequent enkindlement. It's referring to this person in the Aurignacian culture who first looked up to the night sky and related what they saw to events taking place on the ground, but also their own sort of individual destiny, if you will. This is what sort of sparked what is referred to among paleoanthropologists as the creative explosion. The fact that the night sky was now seen and perceived as this sort of origin of divinity, this place where human beings could look up to kind of understand where they've come from, but also where they were headed to. And you can see that in the ideas of the cosmic hunt, this idea that, you know, when you die, you go up to the stars, this idea of astranthropy. This is all related to the idea of this first astronaut. We call it the first astronaut or the first astronicist, the founder of Astronicism, the first person essentially to kind of look up at the night sky and relate what they saw to themselves and their beliefs and their destiny, essentially. So there's a lot of related beliefs and motifs that are part of the Astronic tradition. I'm not going to go through these word by word, but you can take a look at these. They're just, again, ideas, assertions, motifs, beliefs that are being explored as part of the Astrodoxy right now, as part of the ongoing development of the Astronic theory. Okay. Another final aspect of how the Astronic tradition has sort of brought about new ideas is this idea of astroncy. So astroncy is what I've developed as a type of belief system, like a religion, a philosophy, a spirituality, or a political ideology, for example. However, it is distinguished from these other belief system types by the unifying belief in aponism, namely that the astronomical world possesses redemptive functions. So just as a religion incorporates belief in a god or gods, an astroncy is characterized by its belief in transcension. So astronism is considered the first official form of astroncy because of its official adoption and profession of the transcension doctrine as its central dogma. A dogma in Astronism is a belief that must necessarily be held to be called an astronist. And so Astrodoxy, again, as I've said earlier, is a type of belief system that stands alongside those other belief system types. So now we'll move on to section 7 of the Total Immersion 2, which we will now be looking at the Surosia and as the sort of central ritual of Astronism, and looking at how this central ritual is really the invocation of scope, this analytic complement that I spoke about a little bit earlier on. Okay, so let's get on with section 7. So the Surosia is the central ritual of Astronism, essentially. There's not a lot of rituals in Astronism. There's a lot of practices, but not as many rituals. And in fact, the Surosia is the main ritual of Astronism. It will be more widely in more detail explained in the Astrodoxy. This is just a little bit of an intro to the Surosia, like I did in one of the previous lectures this season, just to kind of introduce people to the function of this ritual in transcension. And then in the Astrodoxy, what I will do is I will detail the sort of every different aspect of the ritual and actually tell you what the ritual entails, essentially. But that's still being developed as part of the Astrodoxy. Anyway, so the ritual of the Surosia is a ritual of recommitment to transcension, essentially, and it's made by astronists to ensure that the salvific effects of transcension are maintained. It is essentially an astronist active invocation of scope directly from the divine, and the Surosia is thereby an active invocation of divine intervenience. So as I said earlier on in the theology of the stars section, the divine intervenience brings about scope for human beings. The Surosia is a ritual that can be conducted to actually bring about this divine intervenience, to bring about more receptivity, to bring about sort of a greater awareness of these divine interveniences for the progression of transcension. So the Surosia, in the Surosia, Astronist salvation works on the continuous divine bestowal of scope to humanity as the necessary means or currency of the transcension. And so the Surosian ritual is created for this scopic supplication. So it's about supplying more and more scope to human beings. And then obviously what can then be done is that scope can be applied to progress the transcension along. So it's kind of a helping hand, you could say, the Surosia. Those attending a Surosia are called Surosians, while the person performing a Surosia is called the Surosan. Okay, so there's just a little bit a different sort of terminologies there, you could say. So there is a great siderinity, therefore, of the Surosia. Remember, siderinity refers to the effects of something or its function in the economy of transcension. And in this case, we're talking about the siderinical effects of the Surosia. The Surosia essentially maintains the covenant of transcension in the face of encroachments by the controversion. The Surosia, therefore, performs an important function in the Siderine economy by reaffirming humanity's commitment to the transcensional endeavour. Without this constant reaffirmation of transcension, humanity's enthusiasm for transcension may decline, and so would the Siderine economy as a result. So the Surosia is about keeping transcension going through the currency of scope, by bringing in more currency of scope. So you can think of it in kind of economic terms in a way. The Surasiya is kind of bringing about new opportunity for humanity to embark upon and progress the transcension. I spoke about the Surasian rhythm quite extensively in the Major Astronist Mechanism 4 video, so I'm not going into too much depth with it here, but the Surasian rhythm essentially shows how the Surasiya turns controversion into scope, and then how that progresses the transcension through what we call Suranization. So the Surasian rhythm can only work if individuals congregate to seek out scope for the progression of transcension through their active recommitment to this endeavor. The Surasian rhythm is the sort of underlying mechanisms of how the Surasiya brings about greater scope for humanity. So the aim of the Surasiya is what we call receptionism, which is the receival of scope during the Surasian ritual. And of course, there is major philosophical elements. There's a philosophy of the Surasiya, which I explore in the Astrodoxy quite extensively. The Surasiya, and this is quite interesting, is a kind of marked departure from other aspects of Astronism in that it is theocentric. So obviously you'll know that the worldview of Astronism is cosmocentric rather than theocentric, but in the Surasiya, a central function is given to divine intervenience in the economy of transcension. And so therefore could be seen as a kind of theocentric ritual. So in that sense, it does kind of depart slightly from the cosmocentric worldview, in which the cosmos and limitation are viewed as the most important things to kind of consider and overcome. But the Surasiya kind of invokes this more theistic understanding of or approach to transcension. So the Surasiya is also one of the earliest Astronist rituals to emerge as like a proper, established ritual rather than just as like a practice. There is a particular way that the Surasiya must be performed in order for it to have the sidereal effects that it is intended to have. And of course, this sort of rigid way that it's supposed to be performed is characteristic of a ritual. The underlying assumption of the Surasiya is that divine interventions in the cosmos are happening all the time, but that a certain ritual must be performed in order to open up the limited human receptivity to these interventions that manifest in the form of scope. The philosophy is that human beings may harness these interventions to achieve greater scope and, by extension, to receive greater theological truths and afflation, which is analytic knowledge. Of course, there are also various different dynamics of a Surasiya. So if a Surasiya is an astronist's invocation of scope through divine intervenience, the question emerges as to who can perform, participate in, and receive the benefits of a Surasiya. There is much debate in Astronist philosophy, specifically regarding Surasian philosophy, about the delicate mechanics of a Surasian ritual and its ability to invoke scope, which is essentially an invocation of divine intervenience. Anyone present as a Surasiya can receive the benefits of its scopic effects, whether they are Astronist or not. The only difference is that an Astronist is likely to become more receptive the more scope, the scope they received, than to be more receptive to the scope received than a non-Astronist. To be more receptive of the scope received than a non-Astronist, and thereby better at harnessing the scope received. However, attending a Surasiya can be an important part of Astronist conversion, which is itself a form of harnessing scope for both transcension and astrosis. A Surasan must be an Astronist, although at this stage in the Astronist Institution's view, needn't be officially ordained. So a Surasan must be an Astronist, but there isn't any kind of like priesthood or anything like that that's been established yet. I'm not saying that there will never be, But at this very stage, anyone who is an astronist can theoretically be a Surasan and can lead a Surasean ritual if they perform it correctly. There are different conceptions of a Surasya, so either as a formal congregational event, which is the sort of standard version of a Surasya, but then it can also take an effect as a kind of private event in which only one person performs the ritual to receive its effects. Okay, so it can be kind of public, but it can also be a kind of private event too. Recommissioning transcension. So the Surasya, the central function of the Surasya is recommissioning the endeavor to transcension, and that this is achieved through the part of the Surasya called the recommittal. The performance of the Surasya is the literal rebestowment of the confirmants of scope, afflation, and astronality. Surasya is therefore the literal rescopement of the Surasyans present at the ritual. So it's literally giving these people in attendance more scope than they had received previously. The Surasya is the principal Astronist ritual, and its sidereal effects from its ability to recommission transcension are essential to the Astronist religion, and hopefully by now you'll understand why that is. What is also interesting to consider is the idea of Surosis, which is a collection of mystical and spiritual gifts, you could say. So there is a mystical presence of divinity that comes to infill the whole congregation at a Surasya, that dispenses ample scope and a renewed sense of commitment to both collective and personal transcension that results from the correct execution of the Surasyan ritual. The mystical presence of divine intervenience is called Surosis, or alternatively called the Surotic experience. The Astrodoxy is going to include a full exposition of the ritual of the Surasya, as I said earlier, in its original format, and how to perform a Surasya shall remain unknown until the Astrodoxy is published. So there is a lot more to come with regards to the Surasya and in the Astrodoxy. And I think it is going to kind of change Astronism, really. It's going to mark a new sort of transition for the whole Astronist religion. So I'm quite excited actually to do that, to kind of introduce the idea of the Surasya, and also this idea of the Surosis as well, because it kind of talks about that divine presence. What is also interesting as well is to consider the idea of the ritual of the Surasya in relation to humanity's pursuit of the Twilight-Tide, which the recommitment to transcension is considered key to. So the Surasya recommissions transcension for the purpose of pursuing the Twilight-Tide at the collective level, while the Surasya can also work at the individual level to recommission one's personal transcension, i.e. the astrosis. This recommissioning causes a rekindlement, a sidereal rebirth, if you will, the rejuvenation of one's sidereal scopic nature over one's contrary nature, namely brought about through one's attendance of a Surasya. So it's about enhancing one's sidereal nature over one's contrary nature. In that regard, you can kind of relate those ideas to the scopic nature and the controversive nature that I spoke about right at the beginning of this lecture. We also have this idea of resuranization, which is the ultimate function of the Surasya, namely to make new sidereally. To make new in the eyes of transcension, to make new opportunity in regards to the economy of transcension, to rekindle one's sidereal path, or indeed that of all humanity's sidereal path. So I think that certainly the Surasya holds a very important role in the Twilight-Tide, this decision that humanity has to make, are we going to go for transcension, or are we going to stay here? Are we not going to sort of pursue transcension? The Surasya plays a really important role in kind of getting humanity to commit to transcension through this ritual. okay, which obviously has implications for the twilight tide. We also have this idea of analipsophony, which is addressed in the Astrodoxy. A rekindlement can sometimes produce, or a rekindlement of scope can sometimes produce analipsophony. And analipsophony is an instance of belief in transcension filling the human mind and coming into being with sidereal effect, namely having effect in the economy of transcension. Analipsophonic phenomena is the visible manifestation of transcension in human beings to then cause analyptic dedication as well as devoutness to the Surasiya. So basically, analipsophony is kind of it can be astral ecstasy. It can be it's any sort of visible manifestation of transcension in the human person. In the terms of their dedication, in terms of their experience of a mystical sort of experience, any type of thing like that is brought about through the Surasiya. Okay, so it's brought about through the Surasiya, and this is called the analipsophony. We also have as well, what's really interesting is this idea of surosony. So surosony is the body of after effects, both psychological, spiritual, physiological, and sidereal, that performance or attendance of a Surasiya can reportedly have. So surosony is the consideration of the effects that a Surasiya can produce in a person or as a contagion among the attending Surasiyans. Rekindlement is sometimes interpreted as being of divine origin as a result of one's exposure to the Surasiya, meaning that any instance of rekindlement is the objective analytic work of God in the life of an astronist. More of this will become clear once the Astrodoxy is published, and where I can kind of explain this a little bit better, probably a bit more clearly as well. But right at this moment, these are some of the newest sort of additions to the Astronist body of concepts and ideas. So that's why they might be, a little bit less clear, you could say, a little bit less detail with them, because these are some of the newest things that have emerged. And as I said, the Astrodoxy is going to spend quite a considerable time talking about the Surasiya. So I'm looking forward to you all being able to read that. Section 8 of this lecture looks at the vision for the grand world. Now, the grand world really is one of the most important concepts in all of Astronism, second to obviously transcension and third to maybe a few others, but it is a very central concept. I would say it's definitely in the top 10 in terms of its importance to the Astronist belief system. And the grand world is really a philosophy, a prophecy that is epitomic of Astronism. It is the epitome of Astronism. It is essentially a prophecy which states that humanity's venture among the stars will found a new interstellar civilization that will work towards the ultimate goal of completing humanity's transcension. So the grand world really is the fulfillment of God's will for humanity. It is the fruition of humanity's commitment to transcension. It is not itself the age of salvation, but is the necessary prerequisite to achieving salvation. And it is also seen as the kingdom of transcension to come in the future. So it has many different concepts to it. It's very much, a central Astronist prophecy, and you will see it being referred to quite extensively throughout Astronist writings and literature. So the discipline of elevatology is the study of this Astronist concept and prophecy of the grand world, and an elevatology itself is a particular conception of the grand world, because there are different ideas of what the grand world is or will be. And there are different sort of aspects of the grand world that you could emphasize in your description of what the grand world is. Thereby, an elevatology is literally a conception of humanity's elevation to the astronomical world. The grand world, as you may have already realized, can also be referred to as the analytic kingdom or the kingdom of transcension. And it is the operation of divine intervenience in our limited existence that supports and guides the construction of the grand world. And so the grand world really thereby hinges on the elevation of humanity to the stars, which is, of course, the principal message of the Astronist religion and is the embodiment of the analytic method to salvation, which is, of course, embodied by the process of transcension. So there are I spend quite a lot of time in the Astrodoxy so far, exploring this idea of the grand world. And one of the sort of productions of these contemplations is the fact that there are kind of three main stages to the grand world as I see it, and I refer to these as called archaea, grandea, and then thirdly urania. Archaea is the first stage or form of the grand world in which it remains vulnerable to collapse and has not been perpetuated for long enough to declare humanity as having reached transcension. So the idea of transcension is that humanity's condition, both physically and metaphysically, will at some point change once we are further enough along the process of transcension. And once we do that, obviously the key to getting to that stage is by constructing the grand world. So the archaea really is the sort of first stage of the grand world, really. We're kind of still building it. It is still vulnerable to being collapsed by human effort. But also as well, humanity hasn't quite reached that stage of transcension for certain. The grandea is a firm establishment of the grand world under the banner of transcension, and it is at that point that humanity can be reasonably described as having transcended, as having fully elevated itself to the astronomical world, and then has in turn achieve the state of transcension. However, sufferance continues and humanity remains imperfect. And then finally, we've got urania, which is a state of the grand world in which it has been perpetuated for long enough to form a perfect humanity or even a utopia. So it's at that point that we'll be pretty close, or certainly within reach of realizing how to achieve the transcosmisation, and obviously then to escape the limited existence. So it is at that point of the urania where the grand world will turn into a kind of astronist transcensional utopia. We'll be so committed to the transcensional endeavor that will almost be at its completion, at its fruition, if you will. Now, the term Uranism is one that I've used in the in the Astrodoxy, and it essentially refers to this idea of the grand world being a utopia. So the grand world is sometimes presented as a Urania or Sidereal, which is a utopian astronist civilization constructed under the banner of the pursuit of transcension. The belief that the grand world will be an analytic utopia at some point is called Uranism, meaning utopia in the sky, and is sometimes labelled the Urania, which I've just seen on the previous slide. However, the present view of the Astronist Institution maintains that the prophecy of the grand world does not describe a human civilization without limitations or without suffering and evil, but instead a civilization with less physical limitations than the civilization of the present humanity, and also describes a civilization committed to the endeavor of transcension. So what I'm trying to say there is that the present idea of the grand world to the Astronist Institution is that the grand world world will not be a utopia as we might understand it. There will still be suffering, there will still be evil, there will still be limitations. But once we get to that Urania, we will be able to see a true utopia, really. We'll almost be within the grasp of transcosmisation. And so at that point, we will consider ourselves in a utopia, because that means that transcension's almost complete. And so I can't think of any better situation for humanity in that point. And so to me, that corresponds with being a utopia. I think what the Astronist Institution's position here is just to try to say that, you know, maybe the grand world isn't going to be like a utopia as other religions have described utopias. There's still going to be suffering, there's still going to be evil, but we'll be that much closer, and even, you know, very, very close to completing transcension and saving ourselves. So the grand world is a redeemed final destination of the human species and the astronomical world, second only that to the ultimation itself, which of course we will achieve once we've transcosmized. The function of the grand world is therefore to redeem humanity. It is that process of redeeming humanity. And so the grand world is the kind of material manifestation of transcension, really. The manifestation of transcension in society, in the civilization. Transcension is built into the grand world, is built into this interstellar civilization. And so, as I've said, the grand world is the embodiment of the saved condition of the human species resident among the stars. The functionality of the grand world is to continue the transcensional process that has been conducted by humanity up to the grand world's establishment and construction. And a further key functionality of the grand world is to proceed with humanity's ascent to the realization and attainment of the ultimation via the crucial process of transcosmisation. The grand world is both a prophecy and a promise, in that it promises the fruits of transcension to the human species if the grand world is constructed. And the grand world embodies not just a physical human world, probably a multi-specific one with multi-resident species, but also a transcended mindset that will have produced immense changes for the human condition. And it is that change in mindset, that change in condition, that I refer to as transcension. The concept of the grand world as a prophecy provides the Astronist community with a goal to aim for. For the economy of transcension specifically, constructing the grand world is a necessary precursor to completing transcension. And of course, central to completing transcension is the perpetuation of the grand world. This is a really important part of the grand world's function and its ability to have sort of an effect on transcension. So the crucial part about the sidereal effect of the grand world, i.e. its effect in the economy of salvation, of transcension, is not simply found in how it is constructed, but in that how it must be perpetuated for it to sustain this function in the sidereal economy. The perpetuation of the grand world is essentially important because the civilization that embodies the grand world prophecy must be upheld for long enough that humanity will be able to realize the ultimation. The grand world also, therefore, plays an important role in the Weltescene economy, which is the Astronist Institution's intended management of humanity's endeavour to perpetuate the grand world, to realise and achieve the ultimation. So the Weltescene economy can be seen as a kind of branch of the sidereal economy, the economy of transcension, that tries to it's all about trying to achieve transcosmisation specifically, rather than just transcension more broadly. It's trying to achieve the ultimation, and the perpetuation of the grand world is seen as the kind of the way to do that. The way to achieve the ultimation is through the perpetuation of this interstellar civilization. So transcension, while the grand world is theorized as a physical civilization, it also pertains to an elevated condition of the human species called transcension. Transcension or alternatively called diascension, is when humanity's transcension among the stars is well underway, as signalled by the establishment of the grand world. At this point in human history, it is prophesied that human beings will have achieved great physical and metaphysical advancements thanks to the worldly rewards of transcension. Reaching the condition of transcension therefore indicates the sidereal effect of constructing the grand world civilization. So the transcension shows the changes that will take place in the human species as a result of the construction of the grand world and of following transcension. And it's really just a reflection of changes taking place in human beings to kind of show that progression from where we exist right now. We also have this idea of the Eurasteria. Not only may the word Eurasteria be used in reference to a prophesied astronomical event witnessed by human beings that will act as the harbinger of the grand world, but it can also be used to denote an astronomical world or an astronomical event as a sign of the birth or astronaira of an Astronist prophet. Okay, so it can be used in that regard as well. And of course, this Astronist prophet will then play a sort of central role, really, in progressing transcension. So the Eurasteria is a prophesied astronomical event to be witnessed by humanity as the harbinger of the grand world. And there are also related ideas about Nephiloma, Eurasterism, and I put two Nephilomas in there. I think what it's trying to say there is that there are different types of sort of events, you could say. So the Nephiloma is an astronomical event that's kind of a negative one. So the Eurasteria is like a good sort of astronomical event that signals the grand world, whereas the Nephiloma is the astronomical event that might signal the degradation and subsequent starfall, extinction of humanity. Okay, so that's basically the difference. The Eurasteria is a positive sign. The Nephiloma is the negative sign for things to come. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at section 9, astrospirituality and the metaphysical astronomical world. So of course, section 9 is going to be looking at the astrospirituality, the spiritual sort of heart of Astronism, you could say. And how we would begin is with Astronism's sort of philosophy of the spirit, if you will. So Astronism affirms the existence of both the physical, the seen, and the metaphysical, the unseen. For Astronism as a space religion holding to cosmocentrism, the astronomical world is viewed as the convergence of spirit, souls, and consciousness upon cosmization, physical death. This is the basis of astral spiritualism, the belief that the metaphysical aspects of sapient beings interact with the metaphysical realm of the astronomical world upon cosmization, and by extension, that these interactions have implications for the salvific endeavor of transcension. Okay, so there is that belief in the interaction of that you can interact with the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world, and that these have sort of an effect on the process of transcension. So certainly, Astronism does affirm the existence of both matter and spirit. And so in that sense, it is kind of a spiritualistic religion, you could say, in that sense. But at the same time, it also adds its own identity, philosophy to that by saying that souls consciousness converge in the astronomical world, that it is the astronomical world, this metaphysical aspect, this metaphysical veil of the astronomical world, that is the convergence of spirituality rather than any place here on earth or what other religions see as existing in other places. The astronomical world is that sort of spiritual center of existence, particularly cosmic existence, if you will, because again, the astronomical world is seen as that intermediary between humanity and divinity. So Astronist metaphysics makes a distinction between the soul and the consciousness. And of course, this is at the basis of the philosophy of the immaterial that you can find in Astronism. It is also important to note that Astronism distinguishes between sapient, sentient, and insentient life. The soul, let's define the soul in Astronism, is the immaterial aspect or essence of a sapient being, considered the seat of the will and the conscience. Whereas the consciousness is the potentially infinite core of the soul that was endowed to human beings during the scope of man via a process called enconsciation. So it is believed that at the scope of man, human beings were endowed with this consciousness. Okay, before that they didn't have this consciousness, and that it is this that is potentially infinite. It is this aspect of the soul, this sort of core central aspect of the soul that is potentially infinite. And of course, that's what gives us the hope to be able to exit this cosmic reality. If we didn't have that consciousness, then we would be forever limited, because we wouldn't have anything within us that could be potentially unlimited. So only sapient species, such as Homo sapiens, are therefore considered to possess a metaphysical essence, which is comprised of their soul and their consciousness. Hence, all animal and plant life are considered to be soulless. The scope of man event has also been attributed with being the ensoulment of humanity, as well as the enconsciation event. So the ensoulment, and then of course you've got the enconsciation there as well, the consciousness. There is a warning in Astronist teaching of conflating the existence of an apparent personality or personal characteristics in certain animals to their possession of a soul. Personality in Astronism is viewed to be an indicator of the presence of a will, but not the presence of conscience, and therefore not sapience. Okay, so Astronism states that it is the conscience part that gives human beings their sapience, and that's what distinguishes us as a species from other species. Yes, those other species possess a will, and that will is very kind of often simplistic to a certain degree, but they don't possess a conscience, and that's the difference. So the sidereinical implications of this are huge. The distinction made between these two different aspects of the immaterial part of sapient beings are essential for understanding and providing context to transcension. Firstly, only the consciousness of a sapient person allows for their retention of the capacity to manipulate scope, if you remember back to the divinity part of this lecture, in the overworld after death, which means that transcension is only available to species that are sapient. Secondly, the existence of the metaphysical astronomical world indicates that transcension possesses a metaphysical aspect, which is indeed embodied by the struggle of souls to escape the overworld by their effectuation of the transcension of their living descendants. Thirdly, the metaphysical aspect of the astronomical world plays a role in the economy of transcension because souls in the overworld, as directed by their consciousnesses, can effectuate transcension through scope. Probably you didn't get much of that or understand much of that. I think it will become more clear once you can able to actually read the Astrodoxy and able to actually explore some of these ideas in greater depth. Here today, I'm only able to kind of give you a brief outline of some of these ideas, some of these new additions to the Astrodoxy, which is the Astronist body of beliefs and terms. We also have this idea of the astropneumatics. So astropneumatism is the belief in the spiritual permeation of outer space, which has already been kind of indicated, really, and the resulting theological and spiritualistic implications. The main implication is that outer space becomes not only a source of spirituality, but a spiritual realm in and of itself. Astropneumatics establishes the basis for the astro-eschatological doctrine of the overworld, as viewing outer space as the abode of the souls of the dead. Related is eschatology, which is the study of stellanic experience. So the stellanic scale looks at one's experience of astronality and how one cultivates their stellancy in terms of their experience of a range of natural, preternatural, and supernatural phenomena. The stellanic scale is structured and presented in terms of keys, ranging from key 1, the lowest, to key 12, the highest and most intensive stellancy. So I'm not going to go through all these different keys. You can pause it and take a look at those. But essentially, it's showing how you can sort of reach higher levels of stellancy, engagement with astronality over the course of your life. And of course, I'm definitely on this sort of journey, this path to hopefully one day reach key 12. I'm not really sure what key I'm at now. I mean, maybe key 10, maybe, because I've experienced astral ecstasy. So maybe even key 11, maybe, I don't know. But I mean, even maybe I'm actually at key 12. Yeah. Afflational knowledge and receptions are received that are significant enough to alter Astronist doctrines. So yeah, I probably already am at key 12, actually. But this is only to do with stellancy. It's not necessarily to do with astrosis. Just because you've achieved the highest key 12 of stellancy doesn't mean that you've achieved astrosis, because I don't feel like I have achieved astrosis yet. Astrosis is a broader process. It's more about like your achievement of your full potential, which I don't think I've achieved yet, obviously, because I'm only 24 years old. I've got a long way to go yet. But I do feel like maybe, yeah, I probably am at key 12 because I have produced afflational knowledge and receptions that have even founded Astronism, or at least come to alter Astronist doctrines. So maybe I already am at key 12 then. So, you know, I would encourage astronists out there to kind of follow these keys and try to get up the scale really of stellancy, these stellanic scales. What is also interesting and that has received quite a bit of attention in the Astrodoxy is this concept of pharation or pharency. So through transcension and astrosis, humanity will be taught how to master sufferances by embracing them and ferrying them up to the stars, a process called pharation. The practice of pharency involves alleviating the sufferances of others by taking them on yourself. The receptor takes on the problems of their fellow astronists emotionally and spiritually, which allows the person to progress with their own life, really, and to therefore have kind of reduced sufferance. Pharation describes the actual process of sufferances being raised to the stars. For those who have achieved astrosis, for example, they may be able to raise their own sufferances to the stars without needing another person to do that for them. So I really like that idea of pharency and helping each other to kind of reduce our sufferances and kind of lift those up to the stars. I think it's a really nice concept and practice to be able to engage in for people, to help people essentially. We also have, as well as part of the Astrodoxy, quite extensive explorations of the concepts of prismata and prismatics. So prismatics is the study of the astra, the spiritual energy flowing through the astronomical world that works to connect the metaphysical aspects of cosmic reality to the physical aspects. And of course, that includes human beings ourselves. Prismata is, meanwhile, the sum total of the spiritual functions of the astronomical world. We also have this idea as well of astrality, which is the degree to which one is imbued with astronic energy and the overall condition of their astro-spirituality. So, you know, in various different parts of your life, you may feel that you have a higher, more intense astro-spirituality than in other aspects of your life. This is what we call the astrality. This is your overall condition of your astro-spirituality at any one time. So there is also idea of the cosmos within, which is the concept that essences of the cosmos, which are called energies such as astra, exist within all living things, both sentient and non-sentient beings, and that it is this cosmos within that connects the self and the cosmic, thus leading to cosmosis upon death for all living beings, which is about sort of coming into union with the cosmos when you have died, okay, when you've undergone cosmization. So it's kind of like a spiritual philosophy that's again centered on the astronomical world being the kind of convergence of spirituality, spiritual energy, for example. We also have this idea as well of astromatics, which is actually quite important to some of the beliefs I was talking about earlier regarding manipulation of scope in the overworld. So astromatics is the study of consciousness retainment after death, but specifically in the Astronist context of the overworld. So astromatism, which is the belief in consciousness retainment in the overworld, is crucial to the progress of the Astronist process of salvation in the form of transcension. Astromatization is the process of retaining consciousness after death, the journey to which is considered to be predicated upon achievement of astrosis, which is why astrosis is so key during one's lifetime, and their understanding of knowledge of the astronomical world, namely their astronality. So you've got to have a high degree of stellancy, and you've also got to have achieved astrosis in order to retain your consciousness in the overworld, which then allows you to manipulate scope. So it is really all about reaching that astrosis in order to kind of achieve a sort of better understanding of astronality, scope, divinity, all these different concepts that have emerged during the course of this lecture. So section 10, we're going to take a look at the sidereunion, which I have mentioned before in this lecture, but we're going to go more in depth. Which is, of course, the covenant of the Astronists. Okay, so the sidereunion is a concept that I have sort of referred to really throughout this lecture series today, but also throughout many of the lectures already in this season. It is, firstly, it can also be referred to as the Siderean covenant. And really, the sidereunion is what sidereunically links humanity to divinity. So it's what links humanity's transcension to divinity. The completion of transcension will bring about the fruition of the Siderean covenant for what it was meant to do. So it is a covenant, it is a commitment, an oath that is made by astronists in communion with others to God, that they will fulfill the endeavor of transcension. So the sidereunion, or the sidereunia, bounds all astronists together through the great confirmants and under the oath that an astronist will do all they can to achieve astrosis for themselves and to contribute to the transcension of humanity. At the institution of the transcension, I, Cometan, entered into a new covenant with God, which I called the sidereunion. This is an agreement that I made, that I committed to, which states that astronists will lead the human species to transcension. I established the sidereunion through my founding of Astronism, because Astronism is the embodiment of the analytic method, the method that will be used to lead to the fruition of the covenant through transcension, if it is correctly followed. And the sidereunion was founded by myself to establish a universal oath for astronists to partake in, that would not only establish a distinct astronist identity, but would actually establish the astronist community itself, that sort of worldwide astronist community that are all on the same page in understanding their commitment to transcension. And that's what the sidereunion is. Partaking in the sidereunium, well, when a person experiences the Astronira, they enter into this same covenant with God. So when they experience sort of the astronality for the first time, they enter into this covenant with God, in which they become committed to actualizing their astrosis, to actually achieving their astrosis, as well as progressing the transcension of humanity. Entering the sidereunium confirms one's conversion to Astronism, and part of this, whether explicitly made or not, is one's commitment to transcension via the analytic oath. Analytic revelation and astrotic revelation distinguishes what an astronist must believe and practice, and what they not necessarily believe and practice, but may do so optionally to belong to the sidereunium respectively. Okay, so analytic revelation is something that a person has to believe to be part of the sidereunium, whereas astrotic revelation, you don't have to necessarily to believe it to be part of the sidereunium. So there is this kind of in and out group kind of idea to it. This idea that there are certain individuals called astronists who are committed to transcension and that they've made an oath to do that. The ornament, that's quite an interesting idea. So the ornament is my Cometan's establishment of the sidereunium, which achieved sort of a reconciliation of humankind to transcension as the true destined purpose of our species. So the ornament really is a reconciliation to transcension. The process of oration pertains to one's journey and struggle to reconcile both with transcension as a collective process, for all humanity, and one's own personal astrosis or personal transcension. We also then have this concept of dependentism. So the Astronist Institution makes an exclusive claim to the sidereunium, namely that one must be an astronist to be part of and to take part in the sidereunium. The underlying principle of this claim is called dependentism, namely that the achievement of transcension is dependent upon humanity's conversion to transcension, which connects back to the inevitability of transcension, namely that transcension is not guaranteed to occur, but that astronism provides the method to secure the transcensional endeavor. And so therefore conversion to astronism and following its method will resolve this issue of the inevitability of transcension, this idea that transcension is not guaranteed. We also have this interesting idea of siderism. So this is the doctrine of the sidereunium, namely that the covenant that astronists will do all they can to bring about humanity's embarkation and completion of transcension. Completing transcension, as I said earlier, is considered to be the fruition of the sidereunion covenant. And although there can be an exclusivist approach to the sidereunium, it is also important to remind that this is an astronist ideal that should not be so rigidly adhered to that it inhibits the realistic execution of transcension. So as such, while an exclusive claim is still made to transcension by the Astronist Institution, there is an acknowledgement that transcension will also be dependent on the efforts of non-astronists as well. So it's not just about only astronists, partaking in space exploration, for example. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. But what it does demonstrate is that transcension will have to be also conducted and be dependent on the efforts of non-astronists as well, even if this is, shall we say, indirectly on the part of those non-astronists, even if they're not actually thinking about achieving transcension in the efforts that they do. So the doctrines of the sidereunium, so there are quite a couple here. You've got siderocentrism, which is a focus on astronist ritual or a focus on the sidereunium itself. And you can apply that to various different parts of astronism. Even when you're analyzing astronism, you can do that as well. There's also resolutivism, which is the doctrine that the sidereunion is the original covenant which was made between humanity and God as a direct consequence of the scope of man, and thus Astronists as the revivers of scope for transcension are truly God's chosen people as a means of resolving the debate over which religious grouping are the chosen ones to lead humanity to salvation. Preconditionalism, which states that the doctrine that being an astronist is a prerequisite for astrosis, often based on the sidereunion or being part of the sidereunion, having made the analytic oath. Bond between astronists. So the sidereunion is both the name for the oath of an astronist itself and the bond between all astronists who share in this oath or commitment to transcension in all degrees. It is for its function of interconnecting astronists under an agreement that the sidereunion may be called the Siderean Covenant or the Astronist Covenant. And the sidereunion gets to the heart and reality of what it means to be an astronist, as distinct from any other type of person or as part of any other religion or philosophy. So a sidereist thought or siderism places an absolute emphasis on the sidereunion as the glue that binds astronism together with transcension and all of its doctrines, and with all of the astrosa too, which is the worldwide community of astronists. So there is that idea that the sidereunion, as I said, is that sort of interconnection between all parts of astronism. We also have really interest in this idea of astronist actualism. So actualist perceptions of the sidereunion is that it is the actuality of astronism, that the sidereunion is astronism itself, which is quite interesting to think about. Humanity is essentially existentially bound by our very limited existence on Earth, and which first manifested through the event of the scope of man. So this is the sidereunion being first manifested through the scope of man, but sometimes the sidereunion is referred to as astronism's actuality because it may be considered the crucial provision of salvation, regardless of astronism's existence. And so astronism is predependent on the sidereunion, especially when the sidereunion is considered to precede astronism itself, having its origins during the scope of man. So what I'm trying to say there is that the sidereunion is itself that sort of crucial aspect of transcension that would have continued on even if astronism didn't exist itself. So really it's saying that in a way the sidereunion is even more important than astronism itself as the mere method. Sidereunion is the kind of commitment, to any method, or the commitment to transcension as a whole in general. Okay. We also have the relationship between transcension and the sidereunion. So for astronists, for humanity's transcension to be a true transcension, it must be conducted under the auspices of the sidereunion. The solemn commitment to transcension is therefore just as important to the integrity of transcension as the embarkation and actual completion of transcension itself. This highlights how commitment to transcension by entry into the sidereunion is the prerequisite for a true transcension. Otherwise, there will be a false transcension, and we don't want that. So the sidereunion is seen as this kind of crucial kind of confirmation, really, that the transcension that you are pursuing is the true one, is the true transcension, is the correct way of achieving transcension. Okay, so that was section 10. Let's now have a look at section 11, which goes into more depth regarding the astroeschatology, specifically the overworld and the afterlife among the stars. So of central importance to the astroeschatology is the idea of the overworld. And I've spoken about this quite a few times now. And hopefully you guys, for those who've watched my videos before, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the overworld is, but we'll go through it in this section anyway. So the astroeschatology is both cosmocentric and analipsocentric, in that it is shaped by the principles of limitation and is naturally geared towards the implementation of transcension for the circumvention of cosmic limitedness. So the central astroeschatological doctrine is that not only does the spiritual dimension of outer space exist, but that the metaphysical aspect of the sapient person, namely our soul and consciousness, ingresses into this spiritual realm of the astronomical world following cosmization or death. We do this through what we call astranthropy. So astranthropy is the transmigration of the soul while encapsulating consciousness to the overworld, which is sometimes referred to as the stars, upon its release from the body. So the overworld really is the astronomical world when viewed as the abode of the souls of the dead. Subsequent to astranthropy is the process of the ingression of the soul and consciousness into the overworld, so the entry of these into the overworld. The history of belief in astranthropy is actually very long, tracing its histories back to the tale of the cosmic hunt in prehistory, which implies astranthropy in its story of the cosmic hunt. Astranthropism, despite being a prehistoric belief, continues in the contemporary Astronist religion, impartial fulfillment of the journey of the consciousness to unite with divinity. So what I'm trying to say there is that, yes, consciousness does raise up to the stars at death, but doesn't quite reach divinity itself because of our limited soul. That the consciousness has to be released from. And how do we do that? Through transcension. So there is this relationship between living people and deceased people, in the sense of them being souls and consciousness. That's why we have to achieve transcension to release these called souls and consciousness from the overworld. But I'll get into that a little bit later on. So astranthropy comprises just one stage in the broader process of transtellation, which comprises the whole journey of the soul and the consciousness in the overworld, particularly for the latter, the search for divine unity in ultimation. I'm not going to go through those different stages of transtellation. You can pause the video now and take a look at those, but essentially there is this process of transtellation. It's got many different stages to it, and the ultimate stage of it is basically cosmosis, which is kind of being absorbed into the cosmos, but also being able to get out of the cosmos too. Why do we need to do that? Because the Astronist Institution currently upholds the doctrine of embargo theory and apagaration. So apagaration is the sort of official term for the embargo of all cosmized souls and consciousnesses in the overworld until transcension has come to completion, at which point the consciousnesses will be released from the souls to transcosmize and unite with divinity. Embargo theory is the official institutional understanding of what occurs to souls and consciousnesses in the overworld, namely that they become detained there until the transcension of the species to which those souls and consciousnesses belong is completed. So the embargo theory reinforces the notion both of specific salvation, namely that salvation takes place on the basis of species as a whole, and it also reinforces the idea that there is both a physical and a metaphysical aspect to transcension as well. We also have this related doctrine of the surety, which builds upon embargo theory by maintaining that undertaking transcension means both taking on the responsibilities of humanity's physical transcension, as well as the cosmized souls of the deceased members of the species who are embargoed in the overworld. So once a soul has been ingressed into the overworld, its final fate is then placed under the surety of the species to which it belongs, then dependent on their completion of transcension. So if humanity doesn't complete transcension, then these souls and consciousnesses in the overworld will remain there, and they will never be able to reach divinity at all. They will never be able to come into union with divinity. So this embargo theory highlights the importance of the invocation of the cosmized, which is a single session of which is called an admissional. So the invocation of the cosmized is basically the idea of communicating with those who have been deceased, who are past, who souls of the dead, for example, to try to get further scope for transcension, to try to get further knowledge. So there is certainly kind of a spiritualism aspect to Astronism there, certainly, but it's all astronomical in the sense that it is all based on the fact that the souls converge in the overworld, that it's based up there rather than sort of down here in a way. So there is this kind of astral spiritualism, as I referred to earlier on. So cosmosis is a term that's widely used in astronism and has many sort of colloquial and technical applications. But in this regard, in its technical application of the term, and especially in the context of astroeschatology, cosmosis is the release of the consciousness from the confines of the limited soul, then allowing for the transcosmisation of that consciousness, meaning to transcend beyond the limited cosmos. Sometimes cosmosis may be described as the destruction or the elimination of the limited soul to leave only its infinite core called the consciousness. A species' completion of transcension is the necessary precondition for the soul to reach cosmosis and to thereby break the embargo holding consciousnesses in the overworld, which is why transcension is so crucial to astronism, because it holds both physical and metaphysical functions or effect, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, the ultimate sort of goal here is transcosmisation, and transcosmisation sees the harmony of a species restored in that it is no longer bound to cosmic limitation and need not therefore suffer under the consequences of limitation. And it is for this reason that the transcosmisation is equated with full salvation. That's why we refer to transcension as being the sort of path to salvation, because transcosmisation is seen as the goal of transcension and is the end of cosmic limitation for that species. So achieving transcosmisation is, however, entirely dependent upon a species' completion of the salvific process of transcension. If you don't go through that sort of process of transcension first, then you can't achieve transcosmisation. So like transcension itself, transcosmisation holds both a physical and a metaphysical dimension, the former necessarily preceding the latter due to the apagoration, which is, of course, the embargo of consciousnesses in the overworld. The physical form of transcension comes in the transcendence of members of a sapient species beyond the boundary of the cosmos, and thereby allowing for their complete release into divine existence as pure consciousnesses, getting rid of their bodies, getting rid of their souls, and leaving just their core infinite consciousnesses for divinity, for divine union, divinosis as it's sometimes called. So the metaphysical form of transcosmisation will take place as a direct result of this physical transcendence of cosmic existence, then allowing all the souls embargoed in the overworld to set free their core consciousnesses. So that was the sort of whistle-stop tour of the overworld. Now I'm going to be finishing this lecture by looking at the section 12, actually going in more specifically on transcosmisation as the goal of astronism and what will take place after transcosmisation. So this is quite interesting. As I mentioned right at the beginning of this lecture earlier on, I said I was going to talk about the monism of the cosmos, the Astronist monistic understanding of reality. So Astronism views the cosmos to be a monistic reality, structured and oriented by one single fact, cosmic limitation. In contrast, the universe, where the divine pervades, is also viewed as monistic, but is structured and oriented by the opposite single principle of universal unlimitation or limitlessness. In this regard, reality is composed of either one of two fundamental monistic principles, limitation or unlimitation, and the process of transcosmisation therefore not only describes a fundamental transformation of the limited to unlimited, but also involves the transition of one monistic reality to be able to enter another. Okay, so it's talking about that transition from one monistic reality to another. Okay. We also then come to a particular form of monism that is taken in Astronism called uniquitarian monism. So the Astronist understanding of reality is that each moment, object, concept, or phase of something's limited existence is unique, and so that information remains unique as it is imprinted into cosmic reality. Uniquitarian monism therefore ascribes a unique ontology or beingness to every different substance in reality, both objectively and temporally, and asserts that just as all entities emerge out from a singularity, that they will eventually retract back into the singularity at the end of the cosmos. Uniquitarian monism essentially affirms that the truth of monism in the cosmos, yet adds the caveat that this monicity does not apply beyond the cosmos, and that sapient beings possess the ability to transcend monistic reality through the alteration of their limited nature to become an unlimited nature. Of course, people unlearned of Astronist terminology and Astronist beliefs more broadly might confuse quite easily the transcension with the transcosmisation. And so it's important to distinguish between these two things. So transcension is, of course, the gradual process of transitioning an autonomous cosmic entity into unlimitation. We've spoken about this extensively. Transcosmisation is the fruition of transcension, in that it is the moment that the autonomous cosmic entity, which is the human person, is actually able to transcend into the limited state beyond the cosmos. And this is a physical transition, don't forget. Transcension is thereby the process, while transcosmisation is the event at the end of the process of transcension. Then we come to the ultimate idea of the ultimation, which is really what transcosmisation leads to. So transcosmisation will lead humanity to a state of ultimation. There are 5 main states of being or conditions in Astronism. These are the antipode, which we are in right now, the degradation, which we could go into if we don't embark upon and pursue transcension, the elevation, which is that part that I was saying earlier about the grand world, constructing the grand world, transcension, that's the part where we've changed our condition, we've achieved the grand world, we're almost reaching the transcosmisation, and then you've finally got the ultimation, which is the highest of all of these conditions in all ways, physical and metaphysical. And so it is towards this state of being the Astronist religion strives to have humanity reach. The ultimation is a perfect, infinite existence beyond the cosmos, in which the consciousness of sapient beings may come into unity with the divine. This is called the state of divinosis. Transcension and then transcosmisation are the necessary preconditions to achieving divinosis. The benefits of divinosis center around the idea that once we've reached this sort of divinotic existence, we will be without limitation. And so there will be no form, no physicality to us, no suffering, no evil, no time, nor death, just bliss absolute in infinite existence. That's what it will be, divinosis. So at divinosis, our species will have achieved our ultimate purpose and will have overcome the ultimate challenge of transcension. Divinosis means the consciousness absorbs into God and then partakes in total assimilation in God's creative activities in working towards the transcension of species. So it's at this point that we will have achieved our ultimate purpose, our ultimate fulfilled goal, essentially. But, and this is the huge but, why? Why establish the process of transcension at all? And this comes to the forefront of my thinking, of my brain, which is hurting right now. Why? I don't quite know. There is an undisclosed reason. So there is undisclosed knowledge about why the divine would seek to create cosmoses, to choose species it prefers, and to subject them to the tribulations and judgments of transcension on the promise that they will come into union with the divine upon transcension's completion. What we have to think here is this a game for God? Is this merely just a test of worthiness? Is this a judgment of our righteousness? And will the divine ever make sense to a human mind? So this is really at the forefront, at the very end of Astronism, you could argue. This is at the very end of the Astronist religion, is why? Why all of this that I've just said for the last few hours? Why? I've given you some speculation there. I've given you some ideas, and I think that some of them may have some ounce of truth in them, I think. But I think that ultimately no one knows yet, and I don't know. And I'm always honest with that when I say that, you know, when I don't know something, because I don't. And that's where I'm going to leave it today. I love to speculate about that. I love to be philosophical about it. I love to think about it. But it is also something that I cannot answer. I'm not God. I don't know why I have received this knowledge. And it makes me quite upset and sad to think about this. But I don't know why. People say, well, why have you got this knowledge? Why are you so special? I don't think that I am. I've just got this knowledge. I've just got this knowledge to give to you. And that is it. That is it. Nothing more. There's knowledge there. There's the transcension. Do it if you want to do it. I think it's the truth. I think it is right. At the very core of my being, I believe it. I really, really do. But do I know why? I don't. I don't know why I have this information. I don't know why I have this knowledge. I don't know why I've been able to create these treatises or even experience astral ecstasy. I don't know why. And I don't know why the divine would create all these cosmoses just for this reason. Why not just have us, why not just make us and then we can be part of the divine there and then? Well, then you come to the idea that we have to exist limitedly first in order to become unlimited later on at a later date, at a later time. Otherwise, we would be as gods, wouldn't we, if we were created in an unlimited fashion? We have to be limited first, and we have to go through this process of going from limitedness to unlimitedness in order to fulfill our purpose, but also to learn the secrets of existence, to unite with divinity, to achieve divinosis, and to live in infinite, unlimited existence beyond the cosmos. And that's all I can say. That's at the forefront of my knowledge. Now, maybe at some point in my career, in my life, knowledge may come to me that tells me, that gives me a reason, gives me something more concrete to give you other than these philosophical ideas. But right at this very moment, this is the absolute extent of my knowledge on transcension and the purpose of humanity. But hopefully, as time goes on, we'll get the progressive revelation that transcension is, will continue to work both within myself, but also within others. I know that is working because I've heard from other people that they experience ideas about transcension too. So the progressive revelation of transcension is growing, and with Astronism's guidance, we will get there. I do genuinely believe that. I have I have doubts about humanity, but I don't have doubts about Astronism at all. It is the right path, and it will lead, and transcension will lead to our salvation. So I think I'll leave it there for this second total immersion into Astronism, and also we'll leave it there for season 4 of A Conversation with Cometan. It's been a really emotional season, spoken to so many different amazing people, done so many lectures, produced so many new ideas and great conversations, and I don't know when I will see you again. Hopefully soon, but there's a lot of other things going on in my life right now that mean that I can't commit to another season right this moment. But I sincerely hope that you've all really enjoyed season 4 of A Conversation with Cometan, and please do get in touch with me if any of this resonates with you, if Astronism resonates with you, if you've ever experienced astronality, etc. Please do get in touch with me, because I always love reading your amazing emails. I love it. It's great. So that's me signing off as Cometan, and I will see you in the future. Thank you for listening, everybody, and goodbye.